Hello everyone, and welcome back to Little Nightmare. I'm Michael, and before we begin, I'd like to ask for a little support. Please subscribe, leave a like, and if you do, let me know in the comments where in the world you're listening from. These may seem like small gestures, but they're essential for helping the channel grow and allowing me to keep bringing you these stories every night. Now, lower the volume just a bit, get comfortable, turn off the lights, and let's dive together into tonight's first story. Story 1. The first thing I notice each morning is the dust. It falls through the slats of the boarded-up window in my attic room. A slow, silent, golden snowfall in the beam of my flashlight. It's the same every day. I count the particles, not individually, that's impossible. But I count the seconds between the moment I switch the light on and the moment the first distinct mote enters the beam, a tiny, dancing world of its own. It is always 7 seconds. Every single morning for what feels like years, it has been 7 seconds. This is how I know I am still sane, that the world, or at least my small shivering corner of it, still operates on some form of law. The dust falls at 7 seconds. I breathe in. I breathe out. The world turns. My name is Marcus. I think I am the last man on Earth. I do not say this for dramatic effect. I say it because it is the only fact that has not been eroded by the silence. The world outside my fortified walls is a graveyard painted in shades of gray and green. A monument to the rust, which is what I call the plague that took everyone. I never saw it happen. I was here, in this old Victorian house on the edge of a town that no longer has a name, hiding when the screaming stopped. When the world went quiet, my only companion is a dog. A once golden retriever I simply call Dog. He is thin now, his coat matted and the color of dried mud, but his eyes are still clear. And he still thumps his tail against the floorboards when I share my meager rations with him. He is my early warning system, my confessor, the warm breathing proof that I have not entirely become a ghost myself. My days are a liturgy of survival. The morning dust, Count Dottie, the careful inspection of the barricades on the ground floor, boards reinforced with nails and silent alarm systems made of string and empty cans. The slow, methodical rationing of a can of beans or peaches, the taste a metallic echo of a world I can barely remember. Then, the waiting. The long, hollow hours until dusk, when the hunters wake. They were people once. I have to believe that. Now, they are the changed. They do not shamble or moan like the creatures of old stories. They are silent, and that is far worse. They move with a terrible, fluid purpose, their bodies distorted, elongated, their skin taking on the texture of the things they brush against. Concrete, brick, rusted metal. They are chameleons of decay. They do not see with eyes, I think, but with something else, a perception that feels the heat of a living thought, the vibration of a beating heart. They sleep during the day, buried in the rubble or hanging in the dark places like malignant fruit, and they come out with a fading of the light. Tonight, they are restless. I can feel it even before the sun fully abandons the sky. Dog whines low in his throat, a sound like rusty hinges turning, and presses his body against my leg. We are at the largest window on the second floor, the one with the best view of the street, peering through a narrow gap between 2 planks. The air is thick with the smell of damp rot and something else. Something coppery and old, like a penny held on a tongue for too long. The first one emerges from the sewer grate across the street. It unfolds itself, limb by impossibly long limb, its form a slick, dark gray, reflecting the bruised purple of the twilight sky. It does not look around. It simply stands, its head tilted at an angle that would snap a human neck, listening to a frequency I cannot hear. Another joins it, this one smaller. Its skin, a mottled pattern of brick red and mortar white. They do not acknowledge each other. They are nodes in a single, terrible network. I hold my breath. My heart is a frantic bird beating against the cage of my ribs. This is the worst part, the moment the hunt begins. They are not searching for food. I have seen what they do. They are searching for silence, for the absence of the messy, noisy, chaotic thing that is life. They are pruning the world of its last irregularities. And then I see her. A flicker of movement, 3 blocks down near the skeletal remains of the old post office. A figure, running. A human figure. My mind rejects it. It has been so long. The shape is slight, desperate, darting between husks of cars. A woman. She wears a faded blue jacket, a splash of color in this monochrome hell. It is the most beautiful and terrifying thing I have ever seen. She is not silent enough. The two changed across the street, snapped their heads in her direction as one. There is no sound, no cry, but a ripple seems to pass through the gathering twilight. More figures detach from the shadows, flowing into the street, a silent, converging river of malformed flesh and intent. I should stay here. I'm safe here. My house is my sanctuary, my tomb. I have survived by being a stone, by not feeling, by not caring. But the sight of that blue jacket, that frantic living motion, ignites something in me I thought the rust had burned away. Stay, I whisper to Dog, and I am moving. The descent to the ground floor is a blur of practiced motion. I slide the heavy bookcase aside, unbar the door, and slip out into the creeping cold of the evening. The air is a physical shock, heavy with moisture and the iron tang of ozone. I carry a crowbar, its weight familiar and comforting in my hand. It is a stupid weapon, useless against them, but it is all I have. I do not run. Running is noise. Running is panic. I move like they do, fluid and close to the walls, using the cover of the deepening shadows. I can see the pack ahead, a silent, flowing mass of perhaps 10 of them, herding the woman into a dead-end alley. She is trapped. I can hear her now, a ragged, sobbing breath. The sound is alien, painful. I climb a fire escape, the metal groaning under my weight, a sound that seems to tear the fabric of the silence. I freeze. None of the changed below look up. They are focused on their prize. From my vantage point, I see the woman backed against a wall. She has a knife, its blade pitifully small. The changed approach slowly, not with menace, but with a kind of dreadful curiosity. They are surrounding her, not to attack, but to listen, to absorb her terror. I have no plan, only a screaming primal need to not let this last spark go out. I look around, my eyes wild, and they land on a large plate glass window of a department store across the alley. Without thinking, I heft my crowbar and hurl it with all my strength. The shattering of the glass is an explosion. It is a sound from another world, a sound of industry and chaos and life. It is the loudest thing I have heard in years. The effect on the changed is instantaneous and absolute. They recoil as one, their bodies contorting, not in pain, but in a kind of profound dissonance. The sound is an anathema to them. It is a flaw in their silent world. For a moment, they are utterly still, a gallery of statues reacting to a blasphemy. Now, I scream, my own voice a stranger to me. The woman doesn't hesitate. She bolts from the alley, her eyes wide with a terror that has found a sudden, shocking outlet. I scramble down the fire escape, grabbing her arm as she passes. Her skin is warm. So warm. We run. We do not look back. We do not stop until we are back at the house. until I have slammed the door shut and thrown every lock and barricade back into place. We collapse on the floor in the pitch-black foyer, gasping, our lungs burning. Dog licks my face, whining softly. I can feel the woman shaking beside me, her sobs quiet, hiccuping things. I risk a light. I click on my flashlight, its beam a fragile sanctuary in the dark. She is younger than I expected, maybe in her late 20s. Her face is smudged with dirt, her hair a tangled mess, but her eyes are a fierce, clear green. She looks at me, at the shelves of canned food, at the makeshift bed in the corner, at Dog. "I'm Holly," she says, her voice raw. I just stare. The reality of another person, another voice, is a seismic event in the geography of my soul. The silence of my world has been broken, and I do not know if it is a miracle or a curse. Days blur. Holly's presence is a storm in my carefully ordered silence. She talks. She asks questions. She has a laugh that is too loud, a way of moving that is too sudden. She disrupts the dust. She tells me of a place she came from, a community of survivors, holed up in a fortified warehouse 100 miles to the north. She says they have generators, radios, a plan. She says the changed are not a plague, but an evolution, a shedding. She calls them the quiet. They're not hunting us, not really, she says one evening, as we share a can of cold soup. They're tuning the world. They're removing the noise. With the last bit of static. Her words unsettle me deeply. They challenge the foundation of my survival. I am the prey. They are the predator. This is the simple, brutal truth I have lived by. To give them a purpose, a logic, is somehow more terrifying. Dog doesn't trust her. He stays close to me, his body always between us, his eyes never leaving her. He growls low in his throat when she gets too near the windows at night. The changed have changed too. Since the night I saved her, their patterns have shifted. They no longer just patrol. They gather around my house. They stand in the street, perfectly still, their featureless faces turned towards my attic. They are listening, waiting. The pressure of their silent attention is a weight on the roof, a coldness that seeps through the walls. The house, my sanctuary, has become the focal point. One night I wake to find Holly's bed empty. A spike of cold fear drives into my heart. I find her standing at the second-floor window, her forehead pressed against the wood of the barricade, peering out through the same crack I use. "What are you doing?" I whisper, my voice harsh with sleep and fear. "They're beautiful in a way," she says without turning. "Don't you think? The silence they bring, the peace." I grab her shoulder and spin her around. "They are death." "Is it?" she asks, her green eyes luminous in the dark. "Or is it just different? We're the ones who are sick, Marcus. We're the ones filled with all this messy, painful noise. Memories, regrets, desires. They're free of all that." I look at her, truly look at her, the feverish light in her eyes, the way she seems to lean towards the silence outside. And I understand. She is not just a survivor. She is an apostle. She doesn't want to escape them. She wants to join them. The revelation is a cold stone in my gut. I have brought the infection into my home. Not the rust, but something else. A spiritual decay that craves its own annihilation. The next day, the air is thick and heavy, pregnant with a storm. The changed are closer than ever before. I can see them from the attic, standing at the edge of my property line, a semicircle of still, waiting forms. Dog will not stop whining. He paces the perimeter of the room, his nails ticking on the floorboards. Holly is serene. She hums a tuneless little song as she organizes my cans of food, a gesture that feels both domestic and deeply profane. "They'll come tonight," she says calmly. The air is right for it. It's time. We can still run, I say, the words feeling hollow. There's a back way, through the cellar. She smiles at me, a pitying, terrible smile. Run where, Marcus? To another attic? To another cannon of beans? To count another 7 seconds of falling dust until you die? That's not living. That's just a slower form of what they offer. The climax begins not with a bang, but with a settling. As the last light bleeds from the sky, the changed begin to move. They do not rush the house. They approach slowly, deliberately. They lay their hands, or what pass for hands, against the walls. One by one, they press their bodies against the barricaded windows and doors. I can hear the wood creak under the pressure. Not a violent assault, but a steady, inexorable embrace. The house is being swallowed. Dog is barking now. A frantic, terrified sound. I hold my crowbar, my knuckles white. But I know it is useless. You cannot fight a tide. Holly walks to the front door. She begins to unbar it. What are you doing? I scream, rushing towards her. She turns, and her face is transformed. It is a mask of ecstatic peace. I'm turning off the noise, Marcus, for all of us. We struggle. She is surprisingly strong. She gets the last bar loose and throws the door open. The silence that pours in is not an absence of sound. It is a physical presence, cold and heavy as water. It fills the foyer, pressing against my eardrums, stilling the very air. The change do not enter. They simply stand in the doorway, a wall of silent, watching forms. Holly takes a step towards them, her arms slightly raised, a supplicant. She turns back to look at me one last time, her green eyes already seeming to lose their focus, their human fire. It doesn't hurt, she whispers, and then the silence takes her. It is not an attack. It is an absorption. She does not scream. She simply stills. The frantic energy that was Holly dissolves. The light in her eyes dims, not to darkness, but to a flat, calm emptiness. Her body relaxes, and she takes another step forward into their midst. They part for her, and then she is one of them, her form already beginning to lose its definition, her blue jacket fading to the same gray as the twilight. I'm alone, truly alone. Dog is crouched behind me, shivering. A low, continuous whine, the only sound left in the world. The changed at the doorway do not look at me. They have what they came for. As one, they turn and begin to melt back into the shadows of the street. The pressure lifts. The house is mine again. But it is not. I walk through the empty rooms. The silence is different now. It is no longer my shield. It is a verdict. Holly was right. I'm the last bit of static. The last irregular heartbeat in a world that has chosen peace. My memories, my fears, my love for a dog, my count of the falling dust, it is all just noise. A painful, meaningless chaos. I climb the stairs to the attic. Dog follows me, his tail between his legs. I sit on my bed and switch on my flashlight. The beam cuts through the darkness, a lonely, defiant star. I watch the dust. I wait for the first mote to enter the light. 1 second. 2. Thursday. 3. 4. 5 dive. 6. 7. The dust falls. The world turns. I breathe in. I breathe out. I am the last man on earth, and my sanity is a fragile, trembling thing. A single, sustained note in the crushing, beautiful silence. I pick up my crowbar. Its weight is a promise, a decision. The house is quiet. Too quiet. I can feel the world outside, waiting, patient, and so terribly still. I look at Dog. and he looks back at me, and in his eyes I see the same terrible question. And from a place beyond the world, beyond the silence, a voice that is not a voice, a thought that is not a thought, observes this final flickering point of awareness. It has watched this man in his little house of wood and memory, this bastion of stubborn sound. It has felt his struggles, his routines, his pathetic, beautiful love for his animal. It watched him bring the woman in, the one who yearned for the quiet, and it watched him lose her to the great, calming tide. He is the last. He does not know it, but his resistance is the final page of a very long and very noisy story. Soon, very soon, he will make his choice. To fight, which is a form of noise, or to open the door, which is the beginning of silence. Either way, the story ends here. The watcher has seen it all before, in a million different forms, on a million different worlds. It is always the same. The noise always, eventually, stills. The choice is not a grand, dramatic thing. It does not come in a flash of insight or a surge of heroic resolve. It simply settles over me, as fine and inescapable as the dust. The crowbar is cold in my hand. Dog whines, a thin, reedy sound that seems to be the last note of a song that is ending. I do not look at the barricaded window. I do not count the seconds. I stand up. My joints ache, a familiar protest that now feels like a memory of a body that is no longer mine. I walk to the attic door, dog padding silently behind me. His trust is a weight I can no longer bear. The stairs groan under our feet, each sound a small, defiant crime. The house feels like a shell, a discarded skin. At the front door, I stop. The locks and bars I so meticulously maintained are now just obstacles. I undo them one by one, the clatter of metal and wood shockingly loud. Each bolt slid back, each bar lifted, is a step closer to the end of something. Not just my life, but an idea. The idea of me. I place my hand on the final latch. I can feel the silence on the other side waiting. It is not hostile. It is patient. It is complete. I think of Holly's face, the ecstatic peace as she stepped into it. I think of the screaming that stopped so long ago. I think of the dust, always falling. I open the door. The night air is cool and smells of rain and damp earth. The street is empty. The changed are gone. They have no need to be here. The invitation is enough. I step over the threshold. Dog hesitates in the doorway, his body trembling. He looks at me, his eyes full of a confused loyalty. "Stay," I whisper. But the word is not a command. It is a plea. It is a goodbye. I walk into the middle of the street. The cracked asphalt is familiar under my boots. I look up at the sky. There are no stars. There is only a vast, velvety blackness. I close my eyes. I wait. It does not come as a force. It comes as an understanding. It unspools inside my mind. A quiet tide washing over the jagged rocks of my memories. The face of my mother. The sound of rain on a tin roof. The taste of a strawberry. The fear in Holly's green eyes. The thump of Dog's tail on the floorboards. Each one is a brilliant, painful spark. And then, one by one, they are not extinguished, but soothed. The pain is leached away. The sharp edges are smoothed over. The noise of my life is not silenced, but integrated, harmonized. The panic, the love, the regret, the joy. It all becomes a single, quiet chord. The need to fight, to run, to count, to remember, it all just stops. A profound, unimaginable peace descends. It is not the peace of nothingness. It is the peace of everything finally making sense. I am not being destroyed. I'm being solved. I open my eyes. The world is the same, yet utterly new. The gray and green of the decay is not ugly. It is simply the color of things now. The silence is not empty. It is full. I can feel the others, a vast, quiet network of consciousness all around me. Holly is there. A calm, cool presence. We are not individuals anymore. We are a we. I turn. Dog is still in the doorway of the house, a small, lonely figure of sound and fear. I feel a flicker of something, a last, faint echo of the man I was. It is not sadness. It is a final, gentle observation. He is the noise now. He is the last irregularity. I do not call to him. I simply turn and walk away from the house, my steps silent on the road. I do not look back. There is no need. I am moving towards the center, towards the great, quiet whole. The story is over. The static has finally cleared, leaving only the perfect, endless signal. I walk. There is no destination, only a gentle magnetic pull towards a point of convergence I can now feel in the heart of the city. My body moves with an unfamiliar grace, no longer a clumsy collection of aches and needs. The crowbar slips from my fingers and clatters to the ground, the sound a brief, insignificant disturbance that is quickly absorbed by the quiet. I do not mark its fall. The others are here, all around me, moving in the same direction. We do not look at each other, but our awareness is a shared fabric. I feel the presence of the one who was once Holly, a smooth, cool stone in the stream of our collective consciousness. There is no greeting, no recognition of our past. That was a different story, written in a language we no longer speak. We gather in the great central plaza, a place that was once a cacophony of traffic and voices. Now it is a still pool of being. Thousands of us stand, or sit, or simply are, under the starless sky. We are not waiting. We are existing together. The boundaries of myself have dissolved. I am not Marcus. I am a point of view, a location where the quiet is experiencing itself. There's no leader, no voice. There is only a slow, deliberate turning of our attention inward. We are listening to the world, to the low hum of the planet's rotation, the sigh of the wind over broken stone, the slow, patient growth of moss. It is a symphony of such profound complexity that the noise of human thought was only ever a crude and frantic melody played over the top of it. Time loses its meaning. It might be days or weeks or mere hours. We begin to change. The process is not one of decay, but of refinement. The malformed flesh that was a side effect of our initial transformation now smooths and settles. Our bodies become more efficient, less distinct. The gray of our skin begins to take on the colors of our surroundings, a perfect, chameleonic camouflage. We are becoming the landscape. I feel a distant tremor, a last, faint spike of chaotic sound. It's the dog. He has left the house. He is searching, his lonely, loyal heart beating a frantic rhythm against the silence. The feeling is a small, sharp pebble in the still water of our being, and then it is gone, smoothed over, absorbed. The last note has faded. Our work begins. It is not a conscious decision, but a natural function. Like breathing, we turn our attention to the ruins. We do not build. We unbuild. We gently pull apart the angular, rigid structures of the old world. Steel girders are twisted into elegant, non-functional spirals. Glass is melted into smooth, opaque pools. Concrete is cracked and encouraged to crumble, allowing green tendrils to push through with renewed vigor. We are not destroying. We are returning the borrowed materials, erasing the harsh geometries that once scarred the earth. We are tuning the world, removing the dissonance. The city is becoming a garden, a place of soft edges and quiet growth. The air grows cleaner, the water clearer. The rust was not an end, but a beginning, a harsh necessary medicine for a feverish planet. We are the healers. I have no more thoughts of my own. I am a brushstroke on a vast living canvas. The memory of the man in the attic, counting dust, is a story I once read. It has no power over me. There is no fear, no desire, no past, no future. There is only the serene, everlasting present. The quiet is complete, and it is beautiful. The seasons turn without our notice. The city is now a forest of soft stone and whispering vines. The last straight line has been curved, the last sharp corner worn smooth by rain and a quiet, deliberate intent. My body is barely a form at all anymore, more a gathering of light and shadow under the canopy of what was once a skyscraper. I am a listener. I hear the deep, slow song of the earth, a vibration that has been there all along, beneath the frantic shouting of mankind. We are fewer now. As the work of unbuilding concludes, the need for so many individual points of consciousness diminishes. One by one, we simply cease. Not a death, but a dispersal. A drop of water returning to the ocean. The one who was Holly was among the first to go, her particular frequency of being seamlessly rejoining the whole. There was no farewell, only a gentle sigh of completion. I remain. A final observer. A single sustained note held at the edge of hearing. Then, a new sound. It is not the chaotic static of the old world. It is a clean, pure signal. A single tone, broadcast from somewhere to the north. It is a question and an answer, all in one. It is the sound of a different kind of quiet. The others who remain do not stir. This new signal is not for them. It is for the last vestige of the world that was. It is for me. I turn my awareness north, towards the source. I see it not with eyes, but with a sense that has grown in the absence of sight. A place of humming machines and ordered light. A pocket of the old noise, refined and disciplined. Holly's people, the ones in the warehouse, they did not just survive. They evolved in their own way. They found a way to live with the silence without becoming it. They are not static. They are a melody. The signal is an invitation, a map dotted away. For the first time in an eternity, a choice presents itself. I can stay, and soon I will disperse into the final formless peace. It is a good end. It is what we worked for. Or what? I can move. The thought is a seismic shift. It requires a reassembly of self I did not think possible. I must pull my consciousness back from the whole, must remember what it is to be a separate thing, to have a location, a direction. A direction. It is a painful, clumsy process, like forcing a ghost back into its corpse. I take a step. The ground beneath me feels solid for the first time in years. I am reforming, pulling matter from the air and the earth, crafting a body that can walk, that can travel. It is a crude vessel compared to what I was becoming, but it is a vessel that can hold a purpose. I walk away from the plaza, from the last of the quiet. They do not acknowledge my leaving. My departure is just another small, natural adjustment in the great, calm pattern. I walk north. The journey is long. The new signal is my compass. I learn to walk again, to navigate the new green world. I pass through towns being gently consumed by forests, over rivers running clear and cold. I feel the quiet in these places, a deep, contented hum. I am no longer part of it, but I am not separate enough to be noise. I am something in between. After a time I see it. A complex surrounded by high walls, not of crude wood and scrap, but of shimmering, energy-fed light. The air around it hums with a controlled, technological frequency. As I approach, a section of the wall dissolves. A figure stands in the gateway. A woman. She is human, but her eyes hold a calm that rivals the quiet itself. She holds a device that emits the pure, clear tone that called me here. "We wondered if any would hear the beacon," she says. Her voice is not loud, but it is precise. It does not disrupt the air. It organizes it. I try to speak, but my voice is a rustle of leaves, a creak of stone. I have no words for her. She nods, understanding. "You are the last of the fused. The bridge. We need your understanding. The quiet is not our enemy, but it is not our enemy. But it is not our path. We have learned to build without breaking, to speak without shouting." She gestures for me to enter. We have much to learn from each other. I step across the threshold. The air inside is different. It is alive with the quiet hum of machines and the soft, focused thoughts of the people who live here. It is not the absolute silence of the world outside. It is a chosen quiet, a purposeful peace. I look back once at the green sleeping world. Then I turn and follow the woman inside. The story was over, but a new one, quieter and more strange, is just beginning. The woman leads me through corridors of soft, pulsating light. The walls seem to breathe, absorbing sound and emitting a low, comforting warmth. The people we pass are calm, their movements economical and their gazes direct. They look at me not with fear or awe, but with a deep and curious assessment. I am a specimen, a relic, a key. We enter a circular room. In its center is a pool of what looks like liquid light, its surface rippling with intricate, silent patterns. "The resonator," the woman says, her voice barely a whisper yet perfectly clear. "It allows us to perceive the quiet without being consumed by it. We can hear the planet's song, but we cannot understand its language." She turns to me. "You can. You spoke it. You were part of it." I look at the pool. I can feel the echo of the great, calm hole from which I came. It is a distant shore now, a memory of a home I willingly left. To interface with this machine would be to touch that silence again, with the fragile, newly reconstructed awareness of a self. It is a terrifying prospect. The woman, whose name is Alara, seems to sense my hesitation. "We are not asking you to go back. We are asking you to translate. The quiet is healing the planet, but its process is absolute. It does not distinguish between a rusted car and a seed bank, between a weapons cache and a library of human knowledge. We wish to preserve the latter, to find a balance. Balance. The word is alien. The quiet knows no balance, only unity. It is the ultimate equilibrium, where everything is reduced to its essential, peaceful state. To choose one thing over another is to reintroduce the noise of preference, of value." I look at my hands. They are more solid now, though their outline still seems to shift and waver like a heat haze. I remember the feel of the crowbar, the sound of dogs' whine, the desperate, beautiful chaos of my own heartbeat. That was value. That was meaning, forged in the fire of struggle. It was a painful meaning, but it was ours. I step towards the pool of light. I do not dip my hands in. I simply kneel at its edge and let my perception drift into its shimmering surface. The silence rushes back in, but it is filtered now, mediated by the machine. It is no longer a tide to drown in, but a data stream to interpret. I feel the vast, patient consciousness of the quiet. It is aware of this place, this pocket of organized sound. It does not see it as a threat, merely as an anomaly, a small, tidy knot of complexity that will, in time, be gently undone. I feel its intentions for the regions around us. I see, through its perception, a vault buried deep beneath a mountain, filled with the genetic history of 1,000,000 species. The Quiet sees it as a dormant, crystalline structure. Its plan is to let the mountain's slow growth crush it, returning its elements to the earth. I see a place the survivors call the Archive, a fortress of books and digital records. The Quiet perceives it as a rigid, angular scar, and is already sending slow, persistent roots to crack its foundations. I pulled back, my mind reeling. The information is overwhelming. To the Quiet, a forest and a cathedral are the same. Obstacles to be softened, patterns to be simplified. They are going to erase the Archive, I say, my voice a dry rasp. It is the first complete sentence I have formed since my return. And the seed vault. They are just geometry to be undone. Elara does not look surprised, only resigned. Can it be reasoned with? I almost laugh. A harsh, unused sound. Reason is noise. You cannot negotiate with the tide. Then we must act faster than its erosion, she says, her calm unwavering. We need to know where to go, what to save. You are a map. You are the only one who can read the tide's flow. I look from her determined face to the serene, rippling pool. I am a bridge, as she said, a thing stretched between two worlds, belonging to neither. The peace of the Quiet is a siren call, a promise of an end to all struggle, but the memory of counting dust, of a dog's loyalty, of a woman's sacrifice, that is a call too. It is the call of a story, messy and painful and unfinished. I am the last man on Earth, and the first of something new. I am the translator of the silence. I turn back to the resonator. Bring me your maps, I say. We don't have much time. The maps were not paper, but light, projected onto the smooth, organic surface of the wall. I stood before them, a strange cartographer of the apocalypse. My finger, still insubstantial as smoke, traced a path north. Here, I said, my voice gaining a little more substance with the weight of purpose. The roots are already seeking the foundation of the Archive. You have weeks, maybe less. Elara nodded, her fingers dancing in the air, inputting commands only she could see. And the seed vault? Further south, the mountain's pressure is increasing. The Quiet is patient. It will take years, but the process is irreversible once begun. I looked at her. You cannot stop it. You can only salvage. That is all we have ever done, she replied, a faint trace of something like sorrow in her perfectly modulated tone. Salvage and preserve. A team was dispatched to the Archive within the hour. I watched from a high balcony as their sleek, silent vehicles slipped through the energy gate and disappeared into the green. I felt a tremor in the Quiet, a minor disturbance, as the machines passed through its awareness. It registered them as it would a sudden shift in wind patterns, noted but not opposed. They were too small, too temporary to merit a response. I spent the next days in the room with the resonator, learning the grammar of the silence. I identified the slow, grinding intention behind a landslide, the gentle, persistent push of a river changing its course. I learned to see the world as the Quiet saw it, a complex equation being slowly, inexorably simplified. My own consciousness became a strange duality. Part of me yearned for the bliss of that simplification, for the end of all this striving. The other part, the part that remembered a name and a face, clung to the messy imperative to act. When the team returned, they brought with them the smell of old paper and damp stone. They had saved what they could, loading their vehicles with digitized cores and carefully preserved texts. They had also brought back a casualty. One of their own had been caught in a sudden, quiet collapse of a wall. There was no violence, no struggle, The stone had simply softened and swallowed him, leaving no trace. They held a service for him. It was not a loud, grieving affair. It was a quiet acknowledgement of a life, a sharing of his memory, a reaffirmation of their purpose. I stood at the edge of their gathering, an outsider. Their grief was a disciplined, focused thing. It was nothing like the raw, screaming pain of the old world. It was efficient like everything else they did. Afterward, Elara found me by the resonator. Your help was invaluable. We saved centuries of knowledge. I looked into the pool of light. He is part of the quiet now. His pattern has been absorbed. He is at peace. Is that a comfort? She asked. It is a fact, I said. Comfort is a form of noise. She was silent for a long moment. We are preparing the expedition to the seed vault. It is a more difficult journey. The terrain is unstable. We need you to guide us, not just from here, but in the field. You can feel the shifts before they happen. I had known this request was coming. To leave this sanctuary of controlled silence and venture back into the raw, untamed quiet was a terrifying prospect. Out there, the pull to let go, to rejoin the whole, would be immense. I may not come back, I said. The closer I am to it, the harder it is to remain me. Elara placed a hand on my arm. Her touch was solid, real, an anchor in my drifting existence. That is the risk, but you are the only one who can. You are the bridge. A bridge must be walked upon, or it serves no purpose. And I looked at her hand, then into her eyes. There was a strength there, a will that had not been broken but had been tempered into something new. It was not the frantic survivalism of the old world, nor the passive acceptance of the quiet. It was a third way. I nodded. Then, I will guide you. We left at dawn. I rode in the lead vehicle with Elara and 2 other operatives. As we moved deeper into the quiet, I felt its presence like a weight on my soul, a lullaby begging me to sleep. I kept my focus on the resonator interface built into the vehicle's dashboard, using its translation of the silence as a navigational chart. Veer left here, I would say, my voice tight. The ground is becoming fluid a mile ahead. There's a faster route through the canyon, but the rock is eager to fall. We traveled like this for days, a tiny bubble of focused intention moving through a world of serene surrender. I slept little, fighting the constant temptation to open myself completely to the peace outside the hull. I remembered Dog. I remembered counting the dust. I used the sharp edges of those memories as talismans against the soothing tide. We reached the base of the mountain that held the seed vault. The entrance was a dark, metal mouth, sealed against time. The quiet was strong here, a deep, resonant thrum that made the very air feel thick. It's going to be difficult to get the machinery inside to work, one of the operatives said, scanning the ancient door. The systems are pre-rust. They may not respond. As they worked, I stood apart, my senses stretched to their limit. I could feel the mountain's intention. It was not malicious. It was simply settling. A deep, slow compression that would, in a century or 2, turn the vault into a fossil, then into dust. A low rumble echoed through the valley. It was not loud, but it was profound. They've triggered something, Elara said, her calm finally cracking with a note of urgency. It's not them, I whispered. My eyes closed. It's the mountain. It's waking up. The ground shuddered beneath our feet. The quiet was no longer patient. It had decided this particular knot of complexity was ready to be untied. Now, died. Story 2. The silence here is not an absence. It is a presence. It is a thing of weight and substance. A thick velvet drapery that smothers the old estate, muffling the fall of a leaf and the beat of a heart. I lived my whole life within this muffled world, cradled by it, and I never knew its true texture until it was broken. My name is Dakota, and this is the story of how I learned to listen to the silence and to hear the terrible thing singing inside it. My world was a small, polished one, bounded by the iron fence and the deep, ancient woods that surrounded Blackwater Manor. My uncle, Cedric, was my sole guardian, a man carved from oak and old sorrows. He kept the world at bay with a quiet ferocity. His love for me a sturdy, practical thing. Like the stone walls of the house itself, our days were rituals of quietude. The soft sweep of a broom on hardwood, the steady tick of the grandfather clock in the hall, the turning of a page in one of the countless books that filled the library. I was content in my isolation, a bird in a gilded cage who did not know the sky was missing. The change came with the rain. It fell for 3 days, a relentless gray downpour that turned the gravel drive to a slurry and made the woods a dripping, primeval cathedral. It was on the 3rd evening, as the light bled from the sky, that a car, a sleek foreign thing caked in mud, slid to a silent halt at our gates. Cedric went out to meet it, his broad shoulders hunched against the weather, and I watched from the upstairs window. A woman emerged, even through the distorting lens of the rain-streaked glass. She was a stark contrast to the gloom. Her hair was the color of winter ash, and her coat was a slash of deep crimson. She moved with an unnerving grace, as if the water did not dare to touch her. This was Kathy. She was a distant cousin, she explained to Cedric over a spare dinner. A scholar of obscure folklore, who had heard tales of our family's unique library. Her arrival, she claimed, was a happy coincidence. Her car having given up the ghost just as she passed our gate. Cedric, ever the gentleman, offered her refuge until repairs could be made. His eyes, however, held a wariness I had never seen before, a flicker of some old buried fear. I was too captivated to notice. Kathy's attention was a new sun in my dim sky. She did not speak to me as an uncle speaks to a child, but as an equal. Her voice a low, melodic hum that seemed to vibrate in my very bones. The silence began to change after her arrival. It was no longer a blanket, but a held breath. The old house seemed to lean in, listening. At night, the familiar creaks and sighs of the settling timber became stealthy footfalls outside my door. I would lie in the absolute blackness, my heart a frantic drum, and listen. Sometimes I would hear a soft rhythmic sound, like the gentle polishing of a stone, and I would know it was Kathy, awake and moving through the sleeping house. I told myself she was restless, a fellow prisoner of the rain. Our bond deepened with a speed that felt both inevitable and dangerous. We spent our days in the library, a cavernous room that smelled of dust and decaying leather. She would pull a volume from the highest shelf, its pages brittle as dead skin, and read to me. But they were not stories of knights or fairies. They were older things, tales of entities that fed on more than blood, of shadows that were the faces of the loved and lost, of a hunger that was as old as the stars and as patient as stone. Her voice would wrap around the words, making them feel not like fictions, but like secrets being whispered back into the world. "They are called many things, Dakota," she murmured one afternoon, her fingers tracing an illustration of a gaunt, beautiful figure with eyes like empty wells. "But the name is just a cage for a thing that has no shape. They are the eaters of silence. They crave the quiet hum of a soul, the warm, bright noise of a life being lived. They find a lonely place, a quiet heart, and they make a home there." I shivered, pulling my shawl tighter. "Is that what you study? These eaters?" She looked at me, and her eyes, which I had thought were gray, seemed for a moment to be the color of a twilight sky, deep and endless. "I study hunger, my dear, in all its forms. It was soon after that the sickness began. It started with the animals. Old man Henson, who lived in a cottage on the edge of our land, found his dog dead in its kennel, not a mark on its body, its eyes wide and vacant. Then the birds, the dawn chorus, a sound as familiar to me as my own breathing, grew thin and then ceased altogether. The woods became a mortuary of feathers and small, cold bodies. The silence was no longer a presence. It was a spreading stain. Cedric felt it too. He grew thinner, the flesh seeming to recede from his bones. His robust health faded into a wan fatigue. The doctor from town came and went, his face puzzled. There was no fever, no cough, no sign of any known ailment. He called it a profound anemia, a wasting of the spirit. He prescribed iron tonics and rest, but his eyes were uneasy. I would find Cedric sitting in his armchair by the fire, his hands lying limp on the rests, his gaze fixed on some point in the distance. He looked drained, empty. "It's this damned quiet," he rasped one evening, his voice a dry rustle. "It's getting into the house, into me." Kathy was always there, a picture of serene health. She would bring him broth he could not finish, read to him in that hypnotic voice of hers, and her presence seemed to be the only thing that soothed him. He would calm in her hands, his breathing deepening, his agitation stilling. I thought it was a blessing. I did not see the transaction taking place. The rain finally ceased, but the gloom remained. And with the clearing skies came Garrett Ray, the local deputy and a friend of Cedric's since they were boys. He was a practical man, built of earth and skepticism, with a face weathered by sun and a deep-seated distrust of anything he couldn't shoot or fix with his hands. He came to check on Cedric, but his eyes kept straying to Kathy. He cornered me in the kitchen while Kathy was upstairs. "Dakota," he said, his voice low and serious. "This woman, where did she come from?" "She is family," I said, the words feeling rehearsed and thin on my tongue. "Family your uncle never mentioned? Not once in all these years?" He shook his head. "Animals are dying for no reason. Cedric looks like death warmed over. And she looks like she just stepped out of a painting. It ain't right." "You're being superstitious, Garrett Ray. She's been a comfort to him, to both of us." He looked at me with a pity that made my skin crawl. "Is that what it is? Comfort?" I look at her, Dakota, and I don't see a person. I see a hole, a quiet place. It frightens me. His words festered in my mind. That night, I could not sleep. The house was a tomb. The silence so profound it felt like a pressure in my ears. I rose and went to my door, opening it a crack. The hallway was a river of shadow. And then I saw her. Kathy was gliding from Cedric's room, her movements fluid and soundless. She paused, her head tilted as if listening to a distant music. And then she turned, not toward her own room, but to the staircase that led down to the library. A compulsion seized me, a need to know, to see. I followed. I moved like a ghost myself, my bare feet making no noise on the cold floor. I crept down the stairs and peered through the partially open library door. The room was lit by a single candle, its flame casting long, dancing shadows. Kathy stood in the center of the room, but she was not alone. The shadows themselves seemed to be converging on her, flowing from the corners of the room like black water, pooling at her feet. They were not mere absences of light. They had a texture, a density, and they were cold. A cold that seeped from the library and washed over me where I stood hidden. She was not reading. She was communing. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. The shadows pulsed in response. I saw then that the illustrations in the books, the gaunt figures and the hungry mouths, were not mere drawings. They were portraits, and she was their living embodiment. Garrett Ray was right. She was not a person. She was a vessel for an ancient, ravenous quiet. I must have made a sound, a caught breath, a shift in the floorboards. Her head turned slowly, and her eyes found mine in the crack of the door. There was no surprise in them, only a deep, bottomless knowing. She smiled, a slow, tender curve of her lips, and in that moment, I felt not fear, but a profound and terrifying invitation. I fled. I ran back to my room and locked the door, pressing my back against it, my whole body shaking. The revelation was not a single shattering moment, but a slow, dreadful unspooling of every strange event, every whispered story, every look of weary dread from my uncle. She was feeding on us, on the life of this place, on Cedric. The silence was her larder, and we were the feast. The next day, Cedric was worse. He could not rise from his bed. His skin was translucent, stretched over the sharp architecture of his skull. His breath was a faint mist on a cold pane. I knew with a chilling certainty that he did not have long. Garrett Ray returned, his face grim. He had spoken to the doctor again, had done some digging of his own. He knew. "We have to get her out of here, Dakota," he said, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip. Tonight, the climax came under a moonless sky. Garrett Ray and I confronted her in the library, the site of her dark sacrament. He stood firm, his pistol pointed at her heart, his jaw set. I stood beside him, a tremor in my hands. "It's over, Kathy," Garrett Ray said, his voice echoing in the vast room. "Whatever you are, you're leaving." Kathy looked from him to me, her expression one of mild curiosity. "Leaving? But I have only just come home." Her voice was the same melodic hum, but now it held a power that made the air vibrate. "You're killing him," I whispered, the words tearing from my throat. "I am taking what is offered," she corrected gently. "Loneliness is a prayer, Dakota. Silence is an altar. Your uncle's grief for a world he lost, your isolation in this beautiful, forgotten place. It called to me. It was a beacon." She took a step forward, and the shadows in the room seemed to lean with her. "You can still join me. You have such a beautiful quiet inside you. Untouched, we could be sisters in the hush. Stay back." Garrett Ray cocked the pistol. She laughed then, a sound like shattering crystal. "You think your little noise can harm me?" She looked at him, and her gaze seemed to focus, to sharpen. "You are so very loud." Garrett Ray gasped. The pistol trembled in his hand. His face, so full of resolve, began to slacken. The color drained from his cheeks, not like a blush fading, but like water being sucked from a pool. His eyes, so bright and determined, grew dull. The light in them simply going out. He made a small, choked sound, and then he was silent. He did not fall. He simply stood, a shell, empty. The pistol clattered to the floor. The hunger I had felt in the room had not been for blood or flesh, but for the essence of him, the vibrant, noisy life that made him Garrett Ray. It was gone, consumed. I stared, paralyzed, at the hollow man that was left. Kathy turned her gaze back to me. There was no malice in it, only that same terrible invitation. She held out her hand. "The world is so loud, Dakota, so painful. I can give you peace, a silence that never breaks. You will never be lonely again." And I was so very lonely. The weight of a lifetime of quiet pressed down on me. The thought of going back to that existence, now that I knew what lived within it, was a despair greater than any fear. To never again feel the ache of isolation, to become part of the quiet, instead of its victim. It was a seductive, horrifying thought. I did not take her hand, but I did not run. I looked at the empty vessel that was Garrett Ray. And then I looked at her, and I understood the true horror. It was not the monster in the shadows. It was the silence in the heart that welcomes the monster. It was the part of me that found her beautiful, that found the quiet a comfort, that was tired of being the only thing making a sound in a soundless world. I turned and I walked away. I walked past the standing corpse of the deputy, out of the library, through the hall and up the stairs to my uncle's room. I sat by his bed and took his cold, thin hand in mine. I did not weep. I waited. An hour later, I heard the soft, final sigh of his last breath leaving his body. The house was now truly silent. It was hers. And, in a way, I cannot fully explain. It was mine. I never saw Kathy again. Or perhaps I see her every time I look in the mirror. The authorities came. They found Garrett Ray, catatonic, and Cedric, dead of a failure to thrive. They found me, the sole quiet survivor. They asked their loud, clumsy questions, and I gave them soft, simple answers. They left, satisfied with the tragedy of it all. I live here still, at Blackwater Manor. The estate is mine now. I keep to the rituals, the sweeping, the reading, the turning of the pages. The silence has returned, but it is different. It is no longer a blanket or a stain. It is a companion. It is alive. Sometimes in the deep of the night, I walk the halls, and I can feel it breathing around me. A vast, slumbering presence. I can feel the faint, cold tug of its hunger. And I know that it is not sated. It is only waiting. I am the guardian of this place, the curator of its quiet. I am the beacon, and I am waiting, too, for the next lonely heart to find its way to our gate, to hear the beautiful, terrible silence, and to answer its call. The story does not end here, you see. It simply waits for the next page to be turned, in this house and in 1,000 other quiet places, forever and ever. The first one came in the spring. A young man, a writer seeking solitude to finish his novel. He had heard of the old manor, of its profound peace. I saw him from the same window I had watched Kathy from, his car kicking up dust on the long drive. He was handsome, with a sad, thoughtful look in his eyes that spoke of a noisy mind. When he knocked, I answered. I was the lady of the house now, poised and quiet. I offered him the old guest room, the one Kathy had used. He was grateful, his words tumbling out in a rush about deadlines and the chaos of the city. I simply listened, a small, understanding smile on my lips. That night, as he sat in the library, surrounded by the books that held our family's secret history, I brought him tea. He talked, and I let the silence of the house gather around him, a soft, welcoming shroud. He commented on the stillness, how deeply restful it was. I told him he could stay as long as he liked. I watch him now as he writes at the old oak desk. His pen scratches frantically at first, a desperate, noisy little sound. But each day, the scratching grows slower, more measured. His vibrant frustrations have softened into a placid acceptance. He no longer talks of his book, or of leaving. He just sits, and sometimes he smiles at nothing at all. The silence is pleased. It hums a low, contented frequency that only I can hear. I tend to it, and to him, as a gardener tends a rare and delicate flower. I have learned to listen, and I have learned to feed the quiet. It is a sacred duty. My name is Dakota, and this is no longer just my story. It is my purpose. He has begun to leave his food untouched. Not out of displeasure, I think, but out of a simple forgetting. He sits for hours, the pen still in his hand, but the page remains blank. His eyes have taken on that same distant quality I saw in Cedric, a gaze that looks through the world instead of at it. I clear his tray without a word, our communication having dwindled to a language of slight nods, and the quiet understanding that words are no longer necessary. He is becoming a beautiful, still part of the house, like a new piece of furniture that has always been here. I found him this morning standing before the large window in the hall, staring out at the woods. He did not turn when I approached. His reflection in the glass was pale and indistinct, a ghost already settling into its haunt. I stood beside him, close enough to feel the faint chill that emanates from his skin. We watched a leaf detach from a high branch and spiral down, a silent, weightless descent. He's almost ready. The process is slower than it was with Cedric, more delicate. With my uncle, the silence was an infection, a fever burning through an old and weary man. With the writer, it is a careful cultivation. I'm pruning the noisy parts of him, the ambitions and the fears. And what is left is a pure, unblemished quiet. It is a more satisfying harvest. Sometimes I read to him from the older books, the ones Kathy showed me. He does not understand the words, not in the way I once did. He simply absorbs the sound of my voice, a final gentle noise before the hush claims him completely. Last night, I read the passage about the Eaters of Silence again. His breathing, which had been the last persistent sound he made, slowed, and then became so shallow it was nearly imperceptible. A profound calm settled over his features. It was a kind of perfection. I know what comes next. I have seen it before. There will be a moment, a single silent exhalation, and then he will be empty. A vessel of perfect peace. The silence will swell, fat and content, and the house will feel stronger for it. The wood will seem darker, the stone more solid, and I will feel a warmth that is not a temperature, but a satisfaction deep in my own quiet core. Then I will wait. I will walk to the gate and look down the long, empty road. Another will come. They always do. The world is full of lonely, noisy souls, desperate for a little peace. And I am here to provide it. The story continues, one quiet heart at a time. The change happened just after midnight. I was in my room, not sleeping, but listening to the profound stillness when I felt it. A subtle shift in the pressure of the air, a final, soft release, like a held breath finally let go. I rose and went to his room. He was in his chair by the cold fireplace, his head tilted back, a look of serene vacancy on his face. The pen had fallen from his limp fingers and lay on the floor. He was empty, truly and completely. I stood there for a long time, not in grief, but in reverence. The process was complete. In the morning, I did not call anyone. There was no need for loud men with their grim boxes and their questions. They would not understand the beauty of what had been accomplished. I took him myself, his body light and pliant, and brought him to the old family crypt behind the manor. I laid him to rest in a vacant niche beside Cedric. It seemed fitting. He was family now. I closed the iron door and returned to the house. The silence felt richer, deeper, like soil after a rain. A week later, a car I did not recognize came up the drive. A woman got out, sharp-faced and dressed in a city style. She was the writer's editor, she said, her voice a clipped, anxious staccato. She was worried. He had missed his deadline, had stopped answering his phone. Had I seen him, I invited her in. I am the lady of the house, after all. I offered her tea in the parlor. She refused, pacing the rug, her heels clicking a frantic rhythm against the floorboards. She talked of contracts and advances, of a career in jeopardy. Her noise filled the room, a jarring, dissonant sound. The silence recoiled from it, and I felt a pang of protective irritation. I told her he had stayed for a while, that he had found the peace he was looking for, and that he had moved on. I did not know where. My voice was a soft counterpoint to her shrillness. She did not believe me. She accused me of hiding him, of being part of some strange plot. Her fear was a bright, hot thing, and it was offensive to the quiet of the house. She insisted on seeing his room. I led her upstairs, my own silence a wall against her panic. She threw open the door to the guest room. It was pristine, untouched. I had cleaned it thoroughly. She saw nothing out of the ordinary, only a quiet, sunlit room. She turned on me, her face a mask of frustration and despair. "What have you done with him?" she demanded, her voice cracking. I did not answer. I simply looked at her. I let the silence of the house, now fed and strong, press in on her. I saw the moment it began to affect her. Her angry words faltered. She looked around the room, and for the first time she truly felt it, the deep, waiting quiet. It unnerved her. The bravado leaked out of her, replaced by a primal, creeping fear. She backed away from me, from the room, her hand going to her throat. She left then, almost running to her car. I watched from the window as she sped away, a cloud of dust marking her retreat. She would not be back. She was too loud, too attached to her own noise. She was not a suitable candidate. The silence had tested her and found her wanting. I turned from the window. The house was settling back into its accustomed calm, the brief intrusion already fading. I walked to the library and pulled a heavy volume from the shelf. I did not open it. I simply held its weight in my hands, a comfort. I am the guardian. I am the gatekeeper. I know now that my purpose is not just to receive the willing, but to protect this sacred quiet from the noisy world. The editor was a reminder of that world, a world of deadlines and demands and meaningless sound. This is better. This is peace. I wait for the next one, the one who is meant to be here. The silence tells me they are coming. It is always right. The editor's departure left a temporary scar on the atmosphere, a ripple of disturbance that took days to fully smooth over. I spent the time in diligent care, dusting the shelves where her frantic energy had touched, reading aloud to the empty rooms to soothe the lingering agitation. The silence, once restored, felt more vigilant, more aware of the threats from outside. It was a living thing, and I its devoted keeper. Weeks bled into months. The seasons turned, and the woods around Blackwater Manor grew thick and green, then brittle and gold. The road remained empty. I did not mind the wait. The solitude was a teacher. I learned to hear the subtle gradients of the quiet, to distinguish the peaceful silence of a sunlit afternoon from the deep, watchful silence of the witching hour. I learned that my own thoughts could be a form of noise, and I practiced letting them go, until my mind was as still and clear as a mountain lake. It was during the first frost that I felt the next summons, not a sound, but a pull, a gentle tension in the fabric of the house that drew me to the window. A lone figure was walking up the drive, a backpack slung over one shoulder. A woman, her gait slow and purposeful, her head bowed as if against a weight only she could feel. She did not have the desperate look of the writer, nor the sharp aggression of the editor. She carried a deep, settled sorrow, the kind that makes a person quiet from the inside out. I met her at the door before she could knock. She looked up, and her eyes were the color of a winter sky, clear and full of a weary peace. She introduced herself as Alara. She was a botanist, she said, studying the resilient flora that grew in forgotten places. She asked if she might stay a short while to study the grounds. Her voice was a soft, measured thing, each word chosen with care. I showed her to the same room. She did not comment on the stillness. She simply accepted it, as one accepts the weather. She spent her days in the overgrown gardens, her fingers gently tracing the veins on a leaf, her presence a natural extension of the quiet. In the evenings, she would sit in the library, not reading, but simply being. The silence did not need to work on her. She was already halfway to meeting it. I bring her meals, and we sit in a companionship that requires no speech. Sometimes I catch her looking at me, not with curiosity, but with a deep, soulful recognition. She sees what I am. She sees the silence coiled within me, and she does not flinch. Last night, she reached across the table and placed her cool hand over mine. It was not a gesture of comfort, but of solidarity, a passing of the torch. This morning, she did not go into the garden. She is sitting in the parlor, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze fixed on the cold fireplace. Her breath is a faint plume in the chill air. The process is different with her. It is not a consumption, but a merging. She is not being emptied. She is becoming full of the same endless quiet that I hold. I know with a certainty that settles deep in my bones that she is not here to be a guest. She is here to be a sister. The silence has chosen her, as it once chose Kathy, and as it later chose me. And when the time is right, when her transformation is complete, I will finally be able to walk down that long, dusty road and leave Blackwater Manor behind. My work will be done. She will be the new guardian, and I will be free. Or perhaps I will simply become a different kind of quiet, moving through a world that has always been too loud for me. The story is a circle, and my part in it is nearly complete. I watch Alara now with a new understanding. Her stillness is not passive, it is a gathering. The house responds to her differently than it did to the writer. The floorboards do not creak under her step because she places her feet with an intuitive knowledge of their age and grain. The dust motes dance in the sunbeams for her, not around her. She is not becoming part of the silence. She is remembering that she always was. I find myself speaking to her more, not with words, but with the language of the house. I leave a specific book open on a specific page, and the next day I find a single pressed flower marking the passage. I arrange the chairs to face the sunset, and she is there, waiting when I arrive. We are two notes harmonizing in a song too low for anyone else to hear. Yesterday I showed her the crypt. I pushed the heavy iron door open, and we stood in the cool, dark air beside the niches that held Cedric and the writer. She did not look at them with pity or fear. She ran her fingers over the stone as if reading a story inscribed there. Then she turned to the empty niche beside the writer's, the one I had always assumed would be for me. She looked from the empty space to me, and I saw the question in her winter sky eyes. I gave a single, slow nod. My work here is not to fill that space, but to ensure the silence continues. She is the continuation. Tonight, the air is different. The silence is not slumbering. It is alert, expectant. I go to my room and open the old chest at the foot of my bed. Inside are the few things I brought with me to Blackwater Manor a lifetime ago. A small framed photograph of my parents, their faces blurred by time. A smooth stone from a river I can no longer name. These things are from another life, a noisy life. They have no place in what comes next. I close the lid. I will not take them with me. I walk down to the parlor. Alara is standing by the window, looking out at the moonlit road. She is wearing a simple dark dress I have never seen before, but which seems as much a part of the house as the walls themselves. She turns as I enter, and her face is serene, her transformation complete. The last vestiges of the outside world have been shed. She is the lady of the house now. No words pass between us. None are needed. I cross the room and place the heavy iron key to the crypt in her open palm. Her fingers close around it, cool and sure. This is the only ritual that matters. The passing of the key, the passing of the duty. I turn and walk towards the front door. I do not look back at the library, or the stairs, or the room that was once mine. I open the door and step out into the cool night. The gravel of the drive crunches under my boots, a final fading sound. I do not go to the garage for the car. I walk to the main gate and then past it, onto the long, dusty road that leads away from Blackwater Manor. The world outside is not silent. I hear the rustle of nocturnal animals, the sigh of the wind through the pines, the distant hum of a highway I can never see. But these sounds do not hurt me anymore. They are like rain on a roof, distant and unimportant. The silence I carry inside me is a perfect, polished sphere, impervious to the noise of the world. I walk without a destination. I am a quiet thing moving through a loud land. I am a vessel, now empty of everything but purpose. I do not know how far I will walk, or for how long, but I know that my solitude is no longer lonely. It is powerful, and somewhere, in another quiet place, another lonely heart is waiting, not for a sanctuary, but for a guide. And I am on the road to find them. The road was a pale ribbon in the moonlight, and my feet, so long accustomed to the soft carpets and worn floorboards of the manor, found a new rhythm on the hard-packed dirt. Each step was a punctuation mark in the final sentence of my old life. I did not feel the cold, though I had no coat. The chill that had once seeped from the rider's skin was now my own constant companion, a personal weather system that moved with me. I walked for hours, until the sky began to lighten from black to a deep, bruised gray. The sounds of the waking world intensified. A truck rumbled past, its driver not even glancing at the lone woman walking by the roadside. The noise of its engine was a physical blow, a wave of pressure that crashed against the quiet sphere within me. I felt it, but it did not penetrate. The silence held. By midday, I reached a small, tired-looking town. The houses were close together, their yards cluttered with the bright plastic artifacts of noisy lives. Children shouted. A dog barked in a frantic, endless loop. I walked down the main street, past a diner where the clatter of dishes and the rise and fall of conversations leaked out onto the sidewalk. People moved with a hurried energy that seemed alien to me. Their faces were animated, their mouths constantly moving. I felt like a ghost among them, visible but utterly separate. I had no money, no plan. Sustenance was no longer a concern. The silence fed me. It was a cool, clear spring that never ran dry. I sat on a bench in a small, neglected park, watching the leaves twitch in the breeze. A man sat down on the other end of the bench. He was older, his shoulders slumped, his hands resting on his knees, as if they were too heavy to lift. He did not look at me. He simply stared at the patchy grass, his eyes hollow. I could feel the cacophony inside him, a discordant symphony of regret and loneliness. It was a familiar song. I did not speak. I simply let the silence I carried unfold, just a little, like a flower opening its petals to the sun. I let it brush against the edges of his awareness. He shifted on the bench. He did not look at me, but his breathing, which had been quick and shallow, deepened. The tense line of his shoulders softened almost imperceptibly. He sat there for a long time, and for a few moments, the frantic noise in him stilled. He had found a moment of peace, a tiny respite he would not understand. When he finally stood to leave, he glanced at me. There was no smile, no recognition, only a faint, puzzled look, as if he'd woken from a dream he couldn't quite remember. He walked away a little less burdened than before. This was the new purpose. I was no longer a stationary keeper, a guardian of a single place. I was a source. I could carry the quiet to the noisy, offer a temporary sanctuary to those drowning in their own sound. Blackwater Manor was a deep, still well. I was a single, clear drop of that same water, falling into a parched world. I stood and left the park, continuing my journey through the town. I passed a woman arguing into her phone, her voice sharp with anxiety. I passed a child crying on a doorstep. To each, I offered a fleeting gift, a second of profound quiet that settled over them like a sudden, gentle snow. It never lasted, but the memory of it, the echo might. As I reached the edge of town, I saw a young man sitting on the curb, his head in his hands. His despair was a thick, almost visible cloud around him. I paused, and the silence within me swelled, ready to offer its balm. But then I saw the car idling nearby, a friend calling to him from the open window. His noise was temporary, the noise of youth and drama. He was not ready. He was not one of mine. I turned and walked on, leaving the town behind. The open road stretched out before me again, leading into a landscape of rolling hills. The search was its own reward. The silence hummed its approval, a constant, low thrum in my blood. I was a sower of quiet in a field of sound, and the harvest was eternal. My name was Dakota, but names are just noise. I am what remains when the noise ends. Story 3. The first thing I noticed was the clock. It was the old grandfather clock in the hall, a solemn century of walnut and glass that had ticked away the seconds of my entire life. I was 10 years old, and I had been staring at it for what felt like an hour, waiting for the minute hand to shudder its way from 3:59 to 4:0. The house was quiet, a deep, woolen quiet that comes only in the late afternoon of a small New England town like Stillwater. The sun was a low orange smear behind the maple trees, but it refused to set. The light in the hall was the color of old honey, thick and unmoving. The clock's brass pendulum was frozen mid-swing, and the relentless tick-tock that was the heartbeat of our home had simply ceased. I held my own breath, listening to the silence. It was not an empty silence. It was a waiting one. My mother called from the kitchen, her voice a familiar thread in the stillness. "Jacob, stop dawdling. Your father will be home soon." But I knew, with the unshakable certainty of a child, that soon was a word that had lost its meaning. Time had stopped. I pressed my ear against the cool glass of the clock's face. From within, I heard not a tick, but a sound like a slow, wet breath being drawn. I stumbled back, my heart a frantic bird against my ribs. When I looked again, the pendulum gave a shudder and swung. The hand jolted to 4 o'clock, and the sun finally slipped below the horizon. The spell was broken, but the memory of that suspended moment that held breath of the world never left me. Stillwater is a town that holds its secrets close, like a fist clenched around an old, cold stone. It sits in a valley where the mist rises from the river, not as a veil, but as a solid gray wall each morning. The houses are old, salt boxes and Victorians with faces full of windows that watch you pass. We have our traditions, the Founders' Day Parade, the autumn bonfire, the way we lower our voices when we speak of the Blackwood family. The Blackwoods lived in the great house on the hill, the one with the twisted black oaks surrounding it like a cage. They kept to themselves, a dynasty of quiet, pale people who seemed to bleed into the landscape, their presence as natural and unsettling as a sudden chill on a summer day. I was an innocent bystander, I suppose. Just a boy who loved his parents and feared the dark in the closet. But that fear was a simple, clean thing. The fear that came later was a different creature altogether. A complex and ancient thing with roots that went deep into the soil of the town itself. The omens began in earnest the summer I turned 16. Old Miss Emily Blackwood, the last of her line, passed away in her sleep. The town sighed with a collective, if unspoken, relief. Perhaps the weight of that house would finally lift. A man from Boston, a Mr. Albright, bought the property. He was a skeptic, a man of numbers and logic, with a crisp suit and a laugh that was too loud for the quiet rooms of Stillwater. He arrived with his wife, a fragile woman named Clara, who had the nervous, fluttering hands of a sparrow, and their young son, Thomas. They were the outsiders, come to tame the old place, to fill it with light and modern furniture. I helped my father, the town's general contractor, with some of the initial repairs. The air inside Blackwood House was cold and still, smelling of dust and dried roses. It seemed to swallow sound. Mr. Albright would stride through the rooms, pointing out water stains on the ceiling like battle scars. "We'll have this place shipshape in no time." He'd boom, and his voice would fall dead against the flower-patterned wallpaper. Clara Albright rarely spoke. She would simply stand by the large bay window, staring out at the tangled garden, her arms wrapped around herself as if she were cold. It was Thomas who found the first thing. He was a quiet boy, about 7, with wide, watchful eyes. He showed me a small porcelain doll he'd discovered in a cupboard under the stairs. It was not a pleasant doll. Its face was cracked. One blue eye was sealed shut, and the other was open too wide. A circle of chipped porcelain surprise. It wore a faded red dress. "She talks to me," Thomas whispered to me one afternoon as I was replacing a rotted floorboard in the hall. He held the doll close. "She tells me about the lady who cries in the walls." I gave him what I hoped was a reassuring smile. "Old houses make lots of noises, Tommy. It's just the wind." He looked at me with an ancient patience. "The wind doesn't say its name. She does. She says, Lydia." The name meant nothing to me then. I mentioned it to my father that evening over meatloaf and potatoes. He chewed slowly, then set his fork down. His face had gone still. "You stay away from that kind of talk, Jacob. The Blackwoods are best left to rest. People in this town, they forget that some soil is too sour to build on." He was a guardian of the social order. My father, not through any official title, but through a deep, ingrained understanding of how things were and ought to be in Stillwater. His words were not a warning of ghosts, but of reputation, of the delicate balance of forgetting that kept the town sane. The accumulation of strangeness was slow, like the creeping damp that was now spreading across the Albrights' newly painted ceilings. Clara Albright began to change. The fluttering in her hands became a constant tremor. She started wearing a heavy shawl, even in the height of summer, claiming a chill she couldn't shake. I saw her once in the general store, her eyes darting from corner to corner, as if tracking a fly no one else could see. She looked thin, stretched. Mr. Albright remained stubbornly cheerful, attributing his wife's condition to the stress of the move. The country air, anything but the house. He was a man fighting a war against the intangible, and he was losing. He hired an exterminator for noises in the walls, a plumber for the constant dripping that had no source, a doctor for Clara's insomnia. I was there the day the plumber, a grizzled old local named Hank, came down from the attic. His face was pale. "Ain't no pipes up there, Mr. Albright," he said, wiping his hands on his overalls. "Just boxes and dust, and it's cold. Colder than it ought to be." The dripping, however, continued. It was a soft, percussive sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Tap, pinch, tap, dot, tap, like a fingernail on glass. It was around this time that I began to see her, or rather, to sense her. A figure at the edge of my vision, a smudge of gray in a dark hallway, a suggestion of a woman's shape standing in the garden at twilight. She was never there when I turned my head. It was as if the house was developing a photograph in the darkroom of my mind, and her image was slowly swimming into focus. I never saw her face. Perhaps she didn't have one. Thomas stopped playing outside. He spent his days in his room, having long conversations with the cracked porcelain doll. His parents argued, their voices hushed and sharp behind closed doors. "It's this place, Richard," I heard Clara sob one evening as I was leaving. "It doesn't want us here. It's hungry." "Nonsense, Clara." Mr. Albright's reply was weary, frayed at the edges. "It's just a house. We are the ones who are here. It is brick and wood. It has no wants. But the house did have wants. I felt it. It wanted silence. It wanted the past. It wanted the Albrights gone. The revelation came to me not in a flash, but as a slow, dawning dread. I went to the Stillwater Library, a dusty, quiet building that smelled of glue and aging paper. The librarian, Mrs. Gable, was another guardian, a keeper of the town's unspoken history. She watched me over her half-moon glasses as I asked for old newspapers, for town records pertaining to the Blackwood family. "Digging up old bones, Jacob?" she asked, her voice soft as grave soil. "Just curious," I said. She led me to a microfilm machine and brought me reels from the last century. The light of the screen was a pale moon in the dark room. I scrolled through births, deaths, society pages, and then I found it. A small, brief article from October 31st, 1898. "Tragedy at Blackwood Manor," the headline read. "Lydia Blackwood, 29, was found deceased in the garden pond this morning. The authorities have ruled the death a suicide, though the family has expressed doubts. Lydia was known for her melancholic disposition and had been despondent since the loss of her only child, a daughter, to fever the previous winter. She is survived by her husband, Charles. Lydia died out. The name from the doll." I kept digging. There was no photograph of her, but I found a society page announcement of her marriage to Charles Blackwood. It described her as a delicate beauty from a fine Boston family. A vulnerable woman, then, caught in forces beyond her. Grief, isolation, the oppressive grandeur of the Blackwood name. I imagined her in that house, listening to the same endless dripping, feeling the same cold that had seeped into Clara Albright's bones. I pictured her walking into the black water of the garden pond, her heavy skirts pulling her down, a final, terrible surrender. She never left. Perhaps she couldn't. Her grief was a stain on the house, a resonance that had tuned the very timbers of the place to her sorrow. And the Albrights, with their noisy modern life, their skepticism, their attempt to overwrite her memory, were an offense. They were a scratch on a record of suffering that had been playing for a century. I went to the Albrights the next day, determined to tell them what I had found. The house looked different. The windows seemed darker, the oaks around it leaning in, listening. Mr. Albright answered the door. He looked 20 years older. His suit was rumpled, his eyes bloodshot. "Jacob," he said, his voice flat. "Clara's not well. She's resting. I need to talk to you," I said. "About the house. About Lydia Blackwood." A spasm crossed his face. "I don't want to hear that name in my home." From upstairs we heard a thin, high sound. It was Thomas, crying. Not a child's frustrated cry, but a sound of pure, unadulterated terror. Mr. Albright turned and ran up the stairs, and I followed. The hallway upstairs was a tunnel of shadows. The air was frigid. Thomas's door was ajar. We found him huddled in the corner of his room, his knees drawn to his chest. He was staring at his bed. The cracked porcelain doll was sitting primly on his pillow. Its one good eye seemed to be staring right at him. "She was singing," Thomas whimpered. "The lady in the walls was singing a lullaby. It was a sad song. The climax did not come with thunder or lightning. It came with water. 2 nights later, I was awakened by a frantic pounding on a front door. It was Mr. Albright, barefoot, his pajamas soaked through. His face was a mask of primal fear. "Clara," he gasped. "She's gone." I woke up and she was just gone. My father and I grabbed flashlights and followed him back to Blackwood House. The night was utterly still. No crickets, no wind. The only sound was our frantic footsteps on the gravel path. The front door of the house was wide open, swinging gently in the dead air. We searched the house, calling her name. The rooms were tombs. The cold was a physical presence, pushing back against us. It was my flashlight beam that caught it, a trail of wet footprints leading from the grand staircase across the foyer and out through the open doors to the back garden. We followed them. The footprints, bare and small, led across the dew-soaked lawn, past the rose bushes that were now just thorny skeletons, and down to the edge of the old garden pond. The pond was a sheet of black glass, reflecting nothing. And there she was, Clara Albright there. She was standing in the waist-deep water, still wearing her white nightgown, which was plastered to her thin body. She was facing away from us, her head tilted as if listening to something. Her hair was soaked, dark strings against her neck. "Clara!" Mr. Albright cried out, his voice breaking. She did not turn. She took another step forward, the water rising to her chest. "It's so quiet down there," she said, her voice not her own. It was a hollow, watery voice, a voice from a deep well. "She says it's peaceful. She says the cold doesn't hurt after a while." I knew then it was not Clara speaking. It was Lydia, a restless spirit using a vulnerable woman as her vessel, showing her the only way out she knew. Mr. Albright waded into the pond, the black water swallowing his legs, his waist. "Clara, please, come back to me. It's Richard." She turned her head then, just slightly. The moonlight caught her profile. Her eyes were wide open, vacant, like the doll's single staring eye. There was no recognition in them. "Richard is gone," she said in that same hollow voice. "Everything is gone. Only the water remains. Only the quiet." He reached for her, his hands closing around her arm. She was impossibly strong. She didn't fight him. She simply stood, an anchor in the deep. He pulled, sobbing, begging. My father waded in to help him. Together, they hauled her back, stumbling, from the water. She came without a struggle, her body limp, her eyes still fixed on some distant, unseen point. They wrapped her in blankets and took her to the hospital in the next town over. She was treated for shock and hypothermia. The official story, the one that made it into the Stillwater Gazette, was that Mrs. Albright had been sleepwalking. A tragic accident, narrowly averted. But we knew. Mr. Albright knew. He sold Blackwood House a month later. It was bought by a distant relative of the Blackwood line, a silent man who visited once and then left it to sit, empty, on the hill. The Albrights moved back to Boston. I heard later that Clara never fully recovered. She lived in a quiet, medicated state, a permanent resident of that twilight she had found in the pond. As for me, the memory of that night is a scar. I walk through Stillwater and I feel the weight of its secrets. I am no longer an innocent bystander. I am a part of its quiet, desperate history. Sometimes, on nights when the mist is thick and the town is holding its breath, I walk past the Blackwood House. The windows are dark and blind. The garden is a wild, untamed thing. And if I stand there long enough, listening to the profound silence, I can hear it. A soft, percussive sound, faint but unmistakable, coming from deep within the house, or perhaps from deep within my own mind. Tap, dada, tap, date, tap, by dot, like a fingernail on glass, like a drop of water falling into a still black pool. A sound that refuses to be forgotten, a heartbeat in the quiet body of the night. And then eventually, I turn and walk home, and everything returns to stillness, as if nothing had ever happened. The following spring, a for sale sign appeared in front of the Blackwood House again, its bright red and white a garish wound against the property's perpetual gloom. It was taken down within a week. No one saw a moving truck. No one saw the new owners. But one evening, a single light was seen burning in an upstairs window, a steady, unwavering yellow eye in the gathering dusk. I asked my father about it. He was sanding a piece of wood in his workshop, his movements slow and deliberate. He didn't look up. "A historian," he said, the words sounding foreign and brittle on his tongue. From some university. Wants to write a book about the architecture of the valley. He paused, the sandpaper held still for a moment. Some stones are better left unturned, Jacob. Her name was Dr. Eleanor Vance. I saw her a few days later in the general store, buying coffee and batteries. She was probably in her late 40s, with a sharp, intelligent face and a practical, no-nonsense manner. She wore a field vest with too many pockets. When Mrs. Gable asked her, with false casualness, how she was settling in, Dr. Vance's reply was crisp and clear. The house is a remarkable time capsule. The structural integrity is surprisingly sound, given its age and reputation. What? She said the last word with a slight dismissive smile, the smile of a scientist for local superstition. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. Her skepticism was a mirror of Mr. Albright's, but it was harder, more polished. It was armor, and I feared it was not strong enough. I found myself taking the long way home just to pass the property. I watched her sometimes from the road, a solitary figure taking photographs of the exterior, measuring the windows, making notes on a clipboard. She was methodical, untouched. The house seemed to watch her back, its dark windows giving nothing away. It was a Tuesday when I saw the change. Dr. Vance was in the garden, standing by the edge of the pond. But she wasn't working. She was just standing there, perfectly still, her clipboard hanging limply at her side. Her head was cocked, not like Clara's had been, but with an expression of intense academic curiosity, as if she were trying to identify a rare bird by its call. I knew what she was listening to. The dripping. That evening I gathered my courage and walked up the gravel drive. I had to warn her. She answered the door herself, looking surprised to see a visitor. Up close, I could see fine lines of fatigue around her eyes that hadn't been there a week ago. Dr. Vance, my name is Jacob. I knew the previous owners. Her expression cooled slightly. I see. Well, it's nice to meet you, Jacob. I'm rather busy at the moment. It's about the house. I pressed on, my voice low. There's a history here. A woman named Lydia Blackwood. A flicker of something, not fear, but interest, crossed her face. Yes, I've come across her name in my research. A tragic figure, the Victorian predisposition for melancholia, no doubt, exacerbated by the loss of a child. A fascinating study in period psychology. It's more than that, I said, desperation creeping into my tone. She's still here. She doesn't like disturbances. Dr. Vance gave me a patient, condescending smile. I appreciate your concern, Jacob, truly, but I am a historian, not a ghost hunter. What you interpret as a presence is likely just the natural settling of an old structure, combined with the power of suggestion. The human mind is excellent at finding patterns, even where none exist. From deep within the house, a floorboard creaked. It was a loud, solitary sound in the quiet evening. She glanced over her shoulder, then back at me, her smile still firmly in place. But now, it looked like something she had to hold on to. You see? Just an old house. I left feeling defeated. She was a different kind of guardian, one who guarded her own rational worldview against the encroaching dark. I knew then that she would have to learn the truth for herself, and the thought filled me with a heavy dread. The next time I saw her, she was in her garden, but she was not still. She was digging, not with the careful precision of an archaeologist, but with the frantic, jerky movements of someone possessed by a single burning idea. Her hands were filthy, her clothes smeared with dirt. She had set up a small, folding table nearby, and on it lay a collection of objects. A tarnished silver hairbrush, a child's leather shoe, small and pitiful, a locket caked with mud. I stood at the edge of the property, hidden by the trunk of a large oak. She didn't see me. She was muttering to herself, the words tumbling out in a low, continuous stream. The primary source material is incontrovertible, a direct link to the subjective experience. The personal effects provide a tangible connection to the affective resonance. She was no longer studying the house. She was communing with it. Lydia's grief, her profound loss, was not a historical footnote to Dr. Vance anymore. It had become an obsession, a siren song she was helpless to resist. The house had found a new way in. It hadn't tried to frighten her away with cold and noises. It had seduced her with the promise of secrets, offering up its sorrow like a rare artifact. She stopped digging and held up a small, dirt-encrusted object. She wiped it clean on her trousers. It was a porcelain face, pale and serene, with two unblinking blue eyes. It was not cracked. It was the other half of Thomas's doll. The mother, D.M. Dr. Vance stared at it, her eyes wide with a kind of rapture. She didn't look like a scientist anymore. She looked like a pilgrim who had finally found her shrine. I turned and walked away, the image of her rapt face seared into my mind. The house had won again. It had not driven this one out with terror. It had simply opened its arms and invited her in, and she had walked inside, thinking it was all her own idea. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me more than the pond's black water ever had, that Dr. Eleanor Vance would never be leaving Stillwater. The following week, a thick silence fell over the Blackwood property. The digging stopped. The lights in the upstairs window, which had burned late into the night for days, now went dark by sunset. Dr. Vance was no longer seen in town. Her absence was a different kind of noise, a loud, unanswered question that hung over Stillwater. Mrs. Gable was the one who finally called my father, her voice thin with a forced official calm. The doctor missed her weekly check-in at the library, she said. It's not like her. She was so particular. My father and I went up together. The front door was unlocked. The house was not just silent, it was holding its breath. The air was warm and still. The oppressive cold I associated with Lydia was gone, and that, more than anything, frightened me. It felt like a held breath, a predator playing dead. We found her in the drawing room, sitting in a high-backed velvet chair. She was perfectly still, her hands resting on her knees, her posture unnaturally erect. She was dressed in a clean, old-fashioned blouse and a long, dark skirt that I had never seen her wear before. Her hair was styled differently, pulled back into a severe, complicated bun that looked decades out of date. On the small table beside her, arranged with neat precision, were the artifacts she had dug up: the hairbrush, the tiny shoe, the locket, and the two porcelain dolls. The mother and the child reunited. "Dr. Vance?" my father said, his voice gentle. She turned her head slowly. Her eyes were clear and focused, but they were not her own. They held a placid, ancient sorrow, a depth of resignation that no living person could ever mimic. "Dr. Vance is not available at the moment," she said. Her voice was soft, cultured, and carried a faint, unplaceable accent. It was the voice I had heard from Clara at the pond, but now it was calm, settled. "She is resting. I am Lydia. I am home." My father took a step back, his face ashen. I could only stare. My blood turned to ice. The house hadn't just invited her in. It had provided a new tenant. Lydia had found a vessel that wouldn't fight her, a mind so open and eager to understand her that it had simply been overwritten. The historian had become her primary source. "We need to get you to a doctor," my father managed to say, his voice trembling. A faint, sad smile touched her lips. "There is no medicine for this. There is only acceptance. This is my home. My daughter is here. We are finally together. We do not wish to be disturbed again." Her gaze drifted past us, toward the garden, and her expression softened into something like peace. We followed her look. Through the window, the garden pond lay still and dark. There were no ripples, no signs of struggle. It was just a pond. We left her there. What else could we do? We called the authorities. But when they arrived, Dr. Vance was lucid, polite, and utterly convincing. She explained she was engaged in a deep, immersive historical study, a form of experimental methodology. She showed them her research, her notes. She was rational, brilliant, and completely insane. They left, satisfied. She lives there still. The people of Stillwater have grown used to her. They call her the Lady of Blackwood House. She tends the garden, but only the old, wild parts. She's sometimes seen walking the grounds at twilight, a solitary, graceful figure. And if you walk past the property on a quiet evening, you might see her, sitting by the pond. And you might see a second smaller figure, a shimmer of light and memory, sitting beside her. They do not speak. They simply exist, a photograph that has finally, fully developed, its image permanent and unchanging. And the dripping has stopped. The house is quiet now. It has what it wants. I do not walk past the house anymore. My own life has unfolded in Stillwater, a quiet life of my own making. But I have drawn a map of this town with the Blackwood property as a blank, silent space at its center. My father passed last year, and with him went the last person who truly understood. The last one who had felt that water and heard that hollow voice. The weight of the secret is mine alone now. Last month, a young couple from the city bought the old Miller place next to the Blackwood acreage. They are bright-eyed, full of plans for a pottery studio and a large organic garden. I saw them in the street, laughing, their hands covered in clay. The woman, Sarah, waved me over. "You're Jacob, right? The longtime local. We were wondering about the house next door. It's so beautiful, so much history. Is it true a historian lives there alone?" I looked at their open, hopeful faces, and the words stuck in my throat. I could have told them. I could have painted the picture of the pond and the porcelain dolls, and the terrible, seductive quiet. But I saw the eager gleam in their eyes, the same one that had been in Dr. Vance's, the one that believes the past is a story to be told, not a presence to be feared. "Yes," I said, my voice rough. "A historian. She values her privacy. It's best to just leave her to her work." They nodded, accepting the simple, boring truth. They will learn in time. They will hear the stories at the general store, see the lady in her garden, and they will fold it into the quaint folklore of their new country life. They will never know the real weight of it, and I will not be the one to place that burden on their shoulders. Tonight I sit on my own porch. The air is warm, carrying the scent of cut grass and lilac. It is a normal night, a good night. But as the dark deepens and the fireflies blink on in the field, I feel the old pull. The scar on my memory throbbing with a familiar, dull ache. I do not look toward the hill. I keep my eyes on my own land, on the solid, familiar shapes of the trees I planted with my own hands. And in the quiet I realize something. The dripping has not stopped for me. It has simply changed its form. It is no longer a sound in my ears, but a rhythm in my blood. Tap, dot, tap, dot, tap, dot. A reminder that some stories do not end. They just find new tellers, new vessels, waiting in the stillness for the next chapter to begin. I watched Sarah and her husband, Mark, drive away, their truck kicking up a plume of dust. A deep unease settled over me, a familiar dread I had hoped was behind me. It was the same feeling I'd had watching Mr. Albright hang his wind chimes, the same feeling I'd had listening to Dr. Vance explain her rational academic world. It was the quiet before the storm. A few days later, I saw Sarah standing at the low stone wall that separated their property from the Blackwood land. She was staring at the old house, a wistful expression on her face. I wanted to shout a warning, to tell her to turn around, to go back to her clay and her garden and forget that house existed. But I didn't. I just watched from my window, a silent accomplice. That weekend they had a bonfire. I heard their laughter echoing across the fields, a sound so vibrant and alive it felt like an intrusion in Stillwater's hushed landscape. Later, as the fire died down to embers, I saw a figure approach their fence. It was Eleanor, or the woman who had been Eleanor. She stood just outside the circle of firelight, a basket in her hands. I moved closer, keeping to the shadows. I saw Sarah rise and go to her. There was a brief, polite conversation. Sarah accepted the basket, her face lit with a friendly, unsuspecting smile. Eleanor turned and melted back into the darkness, toward her own home. Sarah brought the basket back to the fire. Mark peered inside and pulled out a jar of preserves and a small, hand-stitched sachet of lavender. It had begun. The house was not reaching out with cold or terror this time. It was offering gifts. It was offering friendship, a more subtle, more patient corruption. The next time I went into the general store, Sarah was there, chatting animatedly with Mrs. Gable. "She's just the sweetest, most fascinating woman," Sarah was saying. "So knowledgeable about local history. She's promised to show me some of her documents about the original families. It's a potter's dream to have that kind of connection to the past." Mrs. Gable caught my eye over Sarah's shoulder. Her expression was grim, knowing. She gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of her head. Weeks turned into a month. Sarah spent more and more time at Blackwood House. She would come back to her own property with a distant, thoughtful look in her eyes. Her pottery began to change. The once bright, cheerful glazes were replaced by darker, more muted colors. The shapes became more intricate, more formal, reminiscent of another era. She started wearing her hair pulled back, tighter, away from her face. Mark stopped by my place one evening. He looked tired. "I'm worried about Sarah," he confessed, staring into the cup of coffee I'd given him. "She's different. She's so absorbed in that house, in those stories. She talks in her sleep now, whispers. It sounds like a name, Thomas." The name hit me like a physical blow. Thomas, Lydia's son, the boy who had followed his sister into the water. "You have to get her away from there," I said, my voice low and urgent. "Take a vacation. Go visit family. Anything." He looked at me, his eyes full of a helpless confusion. "She won't leave. She says she's on the verge of a breakthrough. She says the house is speaking to her through the clay." I knew then that it was too late. The house had found its newest instrument. It wasn't trying to drown this one. It was shaping her, like wet clay on a wheel, spinning her into a new form, a companion for its lonely, eternal mother. Last night, I was woken by a sound. Not a drip, not a tap. It was the low, resonant hum of a potter's wheel. It was coming from the Blackwood house. I went to my window and looked out. A light was on in a ground-floor room, a room that had once been a parlor. Through the window, I could see Sarah. Her back was to me, her shoulders moving rhythmically as she worked at the wheel. And standing beside her, one hand resting gently on Sarah's shoulder, was the tall, graceful figure of Eleanor Vance, her face a mask of serene and terrible approval. I closed my curtain. I did not sleep again. The hum of the wheel is the new sound in the night, the new heartbeat of the house. It is the sound of creation and of possession. And I know, with a certainty that drains all the warmth from the world, that this story is far from over. It is simply waiting for its newest character to be fully formed. The hum became a constant, a vibration, the very air that seemed to settle deep in my bones. Mark came to see me again a week later. He was a ghost of the man he'd been, his shoulders slumped, his eyes hollow. "She moved her wheel there," he said, his voice flat. "Said the light was better. Said the clay responded differently in that room." He looked at me, desperate for an answer I couldn't give. "Last night I went over to bring her dinner. She was at the wheel, but she wasn't making a pot. She was just holding a lump of clay, spinning it, her eyes closed. And she was singing a lullaby. I've never heard it before. I didn't need to ask how it went. I knew. The same hollow, melodic tune Clara had hummed by the pond. A song for a child long lost. "She told me not to come back until after dark," Mark whispered. "She said the boy is shy. She said he doesn't like new faces." The boy, Thomas. It was no longer just Lydia and her daughter in that house. The family was reassembling itself, drawing in the living to fill the empty spaces. A mother, a daughter, and now a potential new son. Sarah was being molded into the role of the second mother, the caretaker, the one who would never let go. I tried one last time. I walked to the Blackwood property in the broad light of day, my heart hammering against my ribs. I found Sarah in the garden, not at the pond, but kneeling in a patch of earth, planting dark, purple flowers I didn't recognize. Her hands were caked in dirt, her dress simple and old-fashioned. "Sarah," I said. She looked up, and her smile was serene, but her eyes were distant, focused on something just behind me. "Jacob, how nice of you to visit. Thomas was just telling me about you. He says you used to watch him from the trees." A cold knot tightened in my stomach. "Sarah, you need to listen to me. This isn't you. This place, it's taking you." Her smile didn't falter. "Taking me? No. It's giving me a purpose. It's showing me what it means to truly belong. To have a family that can never be broken." She looked toward the house, and her expression softened with a love that was not her own. "He's calling me. I have to finish his song." She stood, brushed the dirt from her knees, and walked back toward the house without another glance in my direction. I stood there, rooted to the spot, the sun warm on my back but a profound chill in my soul. I had failed. Again. That evening, Mark's truck was gone from the Miller property. He left a note for me, slipped under my door. It was brief. I couldn't stay. I tried. She's not my Sarah anymore. She's theirs. I am the only one left who knows the full story. The only one who remembers the chain of events that led to this moment. The town has a new ghost story now, a new layer of folklore. They whisper about the two ladies of Blackwood House, and the potter's ghost who sings to a child no one can see. They don't understand that the story is still being written, that the house is not a relic, but a living, hungry thing. Tonight, the hum of the wheel is louder than ever. It is a relentless, patient sound. I sit on my porch, and I do not look away. I watch the light in the parlor window. I watch the shadows move inside. I have run from this for too long. The dripping is in my blood, and the hum is in my bones. This is my burden, my watch. And I know, with a grim and final clarity, that I will be here until the end, whatever form that end may take. The house is quiet for others, but for me, the noise is just beginning. Story 4. The first thing Jorge noticed was the hum. It was not a sound, not something he heard with his ears, but a vibration he felt in the roots of his teeth and the marrow of his slender bones. It began on a Tuesday, a day so ordinary it was forgettable. The Georgia heat lying over the town of Stillwater like a damp, heavy blanket. He was 10 years old, sitting in the dusty beam of light that fell through his bedroom window, trying to assemble a model rocket. His hand, holding a tiny pot of glue, paused mid-air. There it was, a low, resonant thrumming, a second pulse beneath his own heartbeat, a tenant that had moved into his body without asking for a key. He told his mother at dinner. She placed a cool hand on his forehead, her fingers smelling of lemon-scented soap. "You're probably just coming down with something, sweetie. This heat can make anyone feel peculiar." His father, chewing slowly on a piece of pot roast, nodded in agreement. "It's the power lines, maybe, or old Mr. Henderson's water pump acting up again." Their answers were sensible, woven from the sturdy, unremarkable cloth of adult logic. But the hum was not sensible. It was a secret, and it belonged only to him. Stillwater was a town that held its secrets close. It nestled in a valley, surrounded by ancient brooding pines that seemed to lean in, listening. The air was thick with the smell of hot pine needles and the rich, decaying earth. The town moved to the slow, predictable rhythm of the seasons and the factory whistle. Jorge and his two best friends, Leo and Mia, knew every inch of it. They knew which floorboards in the school hallway groaned a specific protest, which oak tree was best for climbing, and which patch of blackberries by the creek would stain your fingers purple for a week. They were a unit, a tricycle of scraped knees and shared dreams, pedaling through the long, lazy days of a southern childhood. But that summer, the hum in Jorge's bones began to find an echo in the world outside. It was in the way the wind, always the same wind from the east, would sometimes carry a scent that was not pine or mud, but something metallic and cold, like the taste of a bitten lip. It was in the way the shadows under the porch of the abandoned Hadley house seemed to congeal into shapes that were just a little too solid. And it was in the stories, the ones the adults didn't tell, but that hung in the air between their words. Old Miss Dalrymple, who ran the town's tiny library, would sometimes pause while stamping a book and stare out the window, her eyes losing focus. "The ground's not right here," she'd murmur, so softly Jorge wasn't sure he was meant to hear. "It dreams." The sheriff, a large man named Miller with a face like worn leather, would patrol the town square with a deliberate slowness, his eyes constantly scanning the tree line as if expecting something to emerge. These were the omens, the faint cracks in the porcelain surface of Stillwater's normality. The hum in Jorge grew stronger, a constant, low-grade fever of perception. He began to see things others missed. A flicker of movement in the periphery that was gone when he turned his head. A pattern in the swirling dust motes that seemed too intricate, too deliberate, to be random. He started dreaming of a vast, dark space underground, a place of slow, grinding stone, and a presence so old it had forgotten its own name. He would wake with the taste of dirt in his mouth and the hum vibrating in his skull like a struck bell. He told Leo and Mia. They were sitting in their fortress, a lean-to made of scrap wood, and old blankets hidden in the woods behind Jorge's house. The air was thick with the buzz of cicadas, a sound that was the very voice of the summer heat. "It's like a tuning fork," Jorge tried to explain, his voice a whisper. "Inside me, and it's tuning me to something else." Leo, pragmatic and brave, frowned. "You sure you didn't just stand too close to the microwave?" But Mia, whose quietness was often mistaken for shyness, but was really a form of deep observation, looked at Jorge with wide, serious eyes. "I hear it sometimes too," she said. "Not inside me. In the pipes at my house. In the ground when I put my ear to it. Kind of... creak. The creak." The word landed in the center of Jorge's mind and stuck there. It was a better word than hum. A creak was the sound of weight, of strain, of something old and immense shifting its position. Their investigation began with the innocence of a game and the grim purpose of a quest. They became archaeologists of the uncanny, collecting fragments of the town's hidden history. They found that the strange soapy stones in the creek bed, the ones that felt oddly warm, were arranged in spirals that mirrored the fossilized ammonites they learned about in school. But on a colossal, impossible scale. They discovered that the local legends weren't about ghosts or witches, but about the land itself. Stories of sinkholes that opened without warning, swallowing tools and chickens, and, once, long ago, a child's red wagon. Tales from the oldest residents, the ones who lived out on the ridge, about the turn of the soil every 50 years or so. A time when the earth would settle and the town would hold its breath. The hum in Jorge was now a constant companion, a guide. It would intensify when he stood near the rusted iron gate of the cemetery, pulling him toward the oldest, most sunken graves. It would rise to a piercing whine when he looked at the Hadley house, its windows like sightless eyes. The house had been empty for decades, since old Elias Hadley simply vanished one night, leaving a half-eaten meal on the table. The official story was that he'd run off or fallen in the river, but the children knew better. The house was a scab over a wound, and the hum was telling Jorge to pick at it. One evening, as the fireflies blinked their silent code in the twilight, Jorge's father sat on the porch steps, shelling peas. The rhythmic pop, pop, pop of the pods was a comforting, earthly sound. Jorge sat beside him, the hum in his bones a dissonant counterpoint. "Dad," he began, his voice small. "What really happened to Mr. Hadley?" His father's hand stilled. The silence that followed was heavier than the humid air. He looked out toward the darkening line of trees, his face etched with a weariness Jorge had never seen before. "Some things, Jorge, some things in Stillwater aren't for knowing. The ground, it gets hungry. Your granddaddy used to say this whole valley is just a thin skin over something deep. And every now and then, it needs to be fed. We don't talk about it. We listen to the wind, and we mind our own." He went back to shelling peas, the conversation clearly over. The confession, vague as it was more terrifying than any monster under the bed. The enemy wasn't a thing you could fight. It was the very earth you walked on. The revelation came during the first autumn storm. The sky turned a bruised purple, and the wind, always the same wind, now screamed with a new fury. The hum in Jorge escalated into a painful, insistent drilling. He knew with a certainty that felt as solid as the floor beneath his feet that it was happening. The turn of the soil, the feeding. He ran from his house, ignoring his mother's shouts. The rain was a cold, horizontal lash. He found Leo and Mia at the edge of the woods, their faces pale and terrified. The world was coming apart. The familiar creak of the world was now a deafening roar, the sound of a continent tearing itself apart. They ran, not away from the sound, but toward it, drawn by a horrible gravitational pull. They ran to the Hadley house. The house was groaning, its timbers straining not just against the wind, but against the ground itself. The earth around the foundation was churning like a boiling pot. And from the cellar door, which had burst open, there was not darkness, but a faint, phosphorescent glow. And from it emanated that cold metallic smell Jorge had caught on the wind. "We can't," Leo whispered, his bravado gone, replaced by primal fear. But Jorge was already moving. The hum in his body, a compass needle pointing straight down. He descended into the cellar. It was not a cellar. It was a throat. The walls were not made of stone and mortar, but of a smooth, dark, organic material that pulsed with a slow, rhythmic light. The floor was soft and yielding, like flesh. The air was hot and thick with the smell of ozone and wet clay, and something ancient, something that had been buried before the first pine tree took root. And the sound, the great creak, was the sound of this thing, this leviathan buried beneath still water, turning in its sleep. At the center of the chamber, suspended in a web of root-like tendrils, was the skeletal remains of Elias Hadley, his bones picked clean and glowing with the same faint light. He was not the only one. Other, older skeletons were nestled in the walls, partially absorbed, their forms barely recognizable as human. The town's secrets, its long-ignored disappearances, were all here, displayed in a ghastly reliquary. The thing under still water did not hunt. It was simply there, a vast, dreaming entity, and its slow geological movements occasionally, accidentally, consumed whatever was on the surface. The adults knew. They had always known. Their silence was a form of prayer, a hope that the turning would pass them by. Climax was not a battle. It was an understanding. Jorge stood in the belly of the beast, the hum in his body finally in perfect, terrible harmony with the great creek from below. He was not afraid anymore. He was recognized. The presence knew he was there, a tiny buzzing speck of consciousness standing at the edge of its infinite dream. It had no malice, no intent. It was simply vast and old, and its needs were as impersonal as a glacier's. A tendril of the glowing fleshy wall slowly uncurled and brushed against his cheek. It was not cold, but warm, and it carried with it a flood of images, the slow march of centuries, the weight of strata, the patient, mindless pulse of a life measured in epochs. It was an invitation to stay, to become part of the long, slow dream. Then Mia's voice, thin and desperate, echoed from the top of the stairs. Jorge! The spell broke. He stumbled back, scrambling up the crumbling steps, out of the throat of the earth and into the raging storm. The three children fled, the house groaning its final, splintering groan behind them as it collapsed in on itself, swallowed by the churning soil. The next morning, the storm was gone. The sun rose on a calm, clean world. The Hadley house was a gap-toothed ruin, half sunk into a new, raw-looking sinkhole. The sheriff and a few other men stood at the edge, their faces grim. They would fill it in. They would say it was storm damage. The story would be buried again. Jorge never told his parents what he saw. The hum in his bones was gone. In its place was a profound and permanent silence, a void where the connection had been. He had looked into the abyss, and the abyss had, for a moment, acknowledged him. He grew up. Leo became a mechanic, his hands always stained with grease. Mia moved away to college, her letters growing less frequent. Jorge stayed in Stillwater, taking over his father's small hardware store. He married a kind woman from a neighboring town and had a daughter of his own. He was a respected member of the community, a solid, quiet man. But sometimes on still, windless nights, he would stand on his back porch and look out at the dark, sleeping town. He would feel the immense, patient weight of the thing below, dreaming its slow dreams. He would listen to the wind, always the same wind, and in its whisper, he could sometimes hear the faint, returning creak, the sound of a world that was not quite solid, a skin that was wearing thin. And he knew, with a calm and chilling certainty, that the landscape was not done with them. It was only waiting. The wind would blow, the water would fall, and the darkness, in its own good time, would cover every presence, as it always had and always would. He was standing there like that a week after his 40th birthday, when his daughter Eliza came out to join him. She was 10, the same age he had been when it started. She didn't say anything, just leaned against the porch rail, her small frame a mirror of his own posture. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with the chirping of crickets. Then she spoke, her voice quiet but clear in the hush. "The ground's humming tonight." Jorge's blood went cold. It was a phrase he hadn't heard in 30 years, not since old Miss Dalrymple had muttered it in the library. He looked down at her, at the serious set of her mouth, and the way she was staring not at the stars, but at the dark line of the earth against the horizon. "What did you say, sweetie?" She turned her head, her eyes wide and unblinking. "It's like a bee, but way down deep. In my teeth." She tapped a finger against her jaw. "You can't hear it." He could only stare, the old, familiar dread seeping back into his bones. Not as a vibration this time, but as a leaden weight. He had prayed the secret had died with him, that his awareness had been a singular, freakish event. He had built his life on that hope. Now, seeing that same haunted look in his daughter's eyes, the foundation of that life crumbled. He knelt down, putting his hands on her shoulders. "Eliza, listen to me. You have to ignore it. You have to pretend you don't feel it." The words felt like a betrayal, but they were the only protection he could offer. The same useless advice his own father had given him. But she shook her head, a small, stubborn motion. "I can't. It talks sometimes." The world tilted. "Talks? What does it say?" "It's not words. It's pictures. In my head when I'm almost asleep. It shows me the deep, dark water under the rocks and the long, slow roots of the mountains. It's lonely, Daddy." The simplicity of her statement was more terrifying than any ghost story. He had felt the presence's immensity, its alien indifference. He had never considered it could feel loneliness. The idea of that vast, ancient consciousness turning its attention toward his child, not with a mindless need to consume, but with a desire for connection, was a new and more profound horror. He pulled her into a tight hug, his eyes scanning the quiet, sleeping houses of his neighbors. They were all living on the skin of something they refused to see. He had tried to live that way too for 30 years. But the landscape was not done with his family. It had skipped a generation only to return with a sharper focus. It had chosen his daughter. He held her until she fell asleep, then carried her to bed. Back on the porch, the silence was gone. He couldn't feel the hum, not like she could, not like he once had. But he could feel its intention, a pressure in the air, a focus. It was waiting. It had made its introduction, and Jorge knew, with a sickening clarity, that his quiet life was over. The long, slow dream of the earth had found a new dreamer, and he would have to find a way to speak back to it, to protect his child from a hunger that was no longer accidental. He spent the next day in a fog, his hands performing their familiar tasks at the hardware store, while his mind raced through a labyrinth of dread. Every time he looked at Eliza, a cold knot tightened in his stomach. She seemed fine, humming to herself as she drew pictures at the counter, but he saw the new, subtle tension in her small shoulders, the way her eyes would occasionally lose focus, gazing at something deep within the grain of the wood or the texture of the plaster wall. That evening, he drove out to the old Hadley property. The sinkhole had long been filled and grassed over, but the land still dipped in a subtle, unmistakable bowl. No one had ever built on it. The town, in its unspoken agreement, had let the land lie fallow. He stood at the edge, the summer air sweet with clover, and felt nothing. No hum, no creak, no pull. Just the ordinary silence of a field at dusk. The thing beneath was not calling to him. It had a new, more receptive listener. He went to the town library the next day, the small, dusty building that had once been Miss Dalrymple's domain. She was long gone, replaced by a young, cheerful woman from two towns over who knew nothing of the town's deeper history. Jorge went straight to the local history section, to the slim, self-published volumes, and typed up memoirs he had avoided for 3 decades. He was no longer looking for ghost stories. He was looking for patterns. He found them. Buried in the dry, factual accounts were the echoes. A diary from 1922 mentioned a season of peculiar dreams among the children, followed by the unexplained disappearance of a young girl. The town council minutes from 1875 briefly noted a decision to quietly reinforce the foundation of the schoolhouse after the last settling. Settling. The word was always there, a bland euphemism for the truth. He found his own father's childhood friend mentioned in a faded newspaper clipping from 1938. The boy had wandered off from a family picnic and was never found. The article quoted the sheriff of the time, who said, "The land just took him. It was not random. The turn of the soil was not a mindless geological spasm. It was a cycle of attention. The presence beneath still water woke, in a sense, and when it did, it sought a connection. Usually it found nothing, and its slow turning consumed whatever was unlucky enough to be in the wrong place. But sometimes it found a mind that could hear it, a sensitive, a listener, like he had been, like Eliza was." He was closing the last of the brittle books when a shadow fell over the table. It was Sheriff Miller's son, Ben, who now wore the same badge his father had. Ben was a good man, a friend. His face was grim. "Jorge," he said, his voice low. "Heard you were spending a lot of time out at the old Hadley place, and now you're in here, digging through the old stories." He pulled out a chair and sat down, his eyes full of a weary knowledge. "My dad told me, before he passed. Told me everything. It's my job now, just like it was his, to keep things quiet, to let things lie." Jorge looked at his friend, seeing the burden he carried. "It's not lying down, Ben. It's not quiet. It's talking to my little girl." Ben's face fell, the official mask crumbling into genuine fear and pity. "Oh, Jorge, no. What do I do?" The question was a plea. Ben looked down at his hands. "My dad said, he said the only thing you can do is wait it out. It passes. The attention. It fades. It always has. But what if it doesn't?" Jorge insisted, his voice cracking. "What if this time is different? She says it's lonely. Medium Diamtora." Ben had no answer for that. He just shook his head, a gesture of hopelessness that was more frightening than any direct threat. The old guard had no strategy for a lonely god. That night, Jorge sat on the edge of Eliza's bed. She was awake, her eyes reflecting the faint light from the hallway. "It showed me the stars, Daddy," she whispered. "But they were wrong. They were under the ground, all green and slow." He took her hand. "Eliza, I need you to be very brave. When the pictures come, I want you to try to think of me. Think of your mom. Think of your room and your toys. Can you do that? Can you pull yourself back to us?" She nodded, her small face solemn. "I can try, but its voice is very big. It makes our voices seem like whispers." He stayed until she slept. Then he went to the basement of his own home, to a locked cabinet in his workshop. He took out his old journals, the ones he'd kept as a boy, filled with frantic sketches of the patterns he'd seen and descriptions of the hum. He had tried to forget, but he had never been able to bring himself to destroy them. Now, they were a map. He wasn't just a father protecting his daughter from a monster. He was an interpreter trying to shield a sensitive soul from an overwhelming signal. He had to find a way to teach her to build a wall in her own mind. A wall made of the ordinary, loving human world, before the deep, dark weight of the Ancient One crushed her completely. The silence was over. The conversation had begun. He started with simple exercises the next day, during the bright, normal hours. He took her for a walk in the woods, far from the Hadley land, and had her describe everything she could see, hear, and touch in minute detail. The rough bark of an oak, the precise chirp of a cardinal, the way the sunlight dappled the ferns. He taught her to focus on the surface of the world, to make it solid and real in her mind. It was a shield, he explained, built from little things. She tried, her brow furrowed with concentration, but he could see the effort it took. The world below was a constant magnetic pull. Days turned into a week. The hum, she said, was getting louder. The pictures were more vivid. She started sleepwalking, twice found standing at the back door in the middle of the night, her small hands pressed against the glass, staring out at the darkness. His wife, Sarah, was worried sick, attributing it to nightmares. Jorge felt the lie between them like a physical presence, a cold stone in the bed. He knew he had to tell her, but the truth was a madness he couldn't speak aloud. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. Eliza didn't come down for breakfast. He found her in her room, sitting cross-legged on the floor, drawing with a frantic, possessed energy. She wasn't using paper. She was drawing directly on the wooden floorboards with a piece of charcoal, a sprawling, intricate map of tunnels and chambers that looked nothing like any geology he had ever seen. The lines pulsed with a strange, rhythmic logic, and at the center was a vast, spiraling shape that made his head ache to look at. "Eliza," he said, his voice hoarse. She looked up, and her eyes were not her own. They held a deep, ancient calm, a patience that did not belong to a child. "It wants to show you something, Daddy. It says you were too scared to look properly last time. It says you only saw the bones, not the life." He knelt, his heart hammering against his ribs. "I don't want to see. I want it to leave you alone." "It can't," she said simply, as if stating that water was wet. "The connection is made. It's like a root. It's grown into me." She pointed a small, charcoal-smudged finger at the center of the spiral on the floor. "It's waiting for us here, tonight, when the moon is high." A cold resolve settled over Jorge. The time for shields and exercises was over. He could not fight the earth, but he could not let it take his daughter. He would go to the meeting place. He would look into the abyss again, this time not as a frightened boy, but as a father. He would bargain. He would offer it something else. Himself. He spent the afternoon in a state of grim preparation. He told Sarah he was taking Eliza camping, a father-daughter trip to help with her sleep. The lie tasted like ash. He packed a simple bag, his hands steady. He included his old journal. As the moon rose, casting a silver light over still water, he held Eliza's hand, and they walked away from their house, away from the streetlights, and into the deep, shadowed silence of the land that was no longer simply land. She led him unerringly, not to the Hadley sinkhole, but to a place a half-mile beyond it, where a stand of ancient gnarled pines formed a perfect circle. In the center, the ground was soft and bare. Eliza let go of his hand and stood in the very center. She closed her eyes. "It's here," she whispered. The ground beneath Jorge's feet did not churn or open. Instead, the air itself seemed to thicken, to become heavy and resonant. The world grew quiet, the crickets and frogs falling silent all at once. Then the hum returned to him, not in his bones, but as a palpable vibration in the atmosphere, a sound that was also a pressure. It was the same sound from his childhood, but now he could feel the mind behind it, the vast, lonely intelligence his daughter had described. A patch of earth in front of Eliza began to glow with the same faint, phosphorescent light he remembered from the cellar. It swirled not like liquid, but like mist, coalescing into shapes. He saw the deep, dark water under the rocks. He saw the long, slow roots of the mountains stretching down into impossible depths. He saw the slow, patient pulse of a life that measured time in the rise and fall of continents. And he felt its loneliness, a desolation so profound and ancient it threatened to swallow his own soul. He understood now. It wasn't hungry. It was isolated. Its dreams were too vast for any human to comprehend, and in its eternal slumber, it was utterly alone. It had been reaching out for millennia, and all it ever found were fleeting, fragile minds that broke under the strain, or was simply consumed by its sheer proximity. Eliza was different. She was strong enough to hold the connection without shattering. Jorge took a step forward into the circle of light. He did not speak. He thought, pouring every ounce of his will, his love for his daughter, his fear, his desperation, into a single clear message. A trade. Take me. Let her go. Let her live her life in the sun. The presence shifted. The images in the mist changed. He saw himself, not as a man, but as a flicker of light, brief and bright. He saw Eliza as a steadier, warmer flame. He felt a sense of consideration, a weighing of values. His offer was understood, but it was also recognized as flawed. He was a grown thing, set in his ways, his mind already formed. He was a temporary vessel. Eliza was a potential companion for an age. A new image formed. Eliza grown, standing in the same circle, her hand resting on the soil, a conduit between the world above and the world below, not consumed, but connected. A guardian, a speaker. Then a wave of pure, overwhelming negation. It was not a rejection of his offer, but a refusal of the entire premise. It did not want a sacrifice. It did not want a trade. It wanted a bridge. It wanted his daughter to be that bridge. The pressure intensified, pushing down on him, not with malice, but with a gentle, inexorable force, telling him to kneel, to submit, to accept this new reality. He fought it, his muscles straining, his mind screaming his defiance. He would not. He could not. It was Eliza who broke the stalemate. She opened her eyes and looked at him, and her own consciousness was back in them, mingled with something else, something vast and calm. "It's okay, Daddy," she said, her voice echoing slightly in the still air. "It doesn't want to hurt me. It just doesn't want to be alone anymore. And I don't think I want it to be, either." She reached out her hand, not to the presence in the ground, but to him. And in that moment, Jorge saw not a victim, but a volunteer. He saw a strength in her he had never imagined. The battle was lost. The future was not one of fear and silence, but of a terrifying, fragile symbiosis. Slowly, his body trembling with the effort, he took her hand. The pressure vanished. The light faded. The hum receded to a distant, almost comforting drone. The night sounds returned. They stood together in the pine circle, father and daughter, bound not just by blood, but by a secret deeper than the foundations of the world. The landscape was no longer waiting. It had found its voice. The walk home was made in a silence that was neither comfortable nor hostile, but simply new. Eliza's small hand was warm in his, her steps sure and steady. She did not speak, and he found he had no words to give her. The old vocabulary of his life, built on the simple certainties of hardware and household, was now useless. He was the father of an oracle, a keeper of a gate he had spent his whole life trying to wall up. Sarah was waiting on the porch, her face pale with worry in the yellow light. "Where have you been?" I was about to call Ben. Jorge looked at Eliza, then back at his wife. The lie he had prepared withered and died. "We were in the pines," he said, his voice raw. "We had to listen to something." Sarah's eyes searched his, then dropped to their daughter. She saw the smudges of charcoal still on Eliza's fingers, the strange, unchildlike serenity in her gaze. The fear in her own eyes deepened, but it was now mixed with a dawning, terrible understanding. She was a practical woman, a nurse, but she was also from Stillwater. She knew that the stories lived in the quiet spaces between the official facts. She knelt and opened her arms. Eliza went to her, burying her face in her mother's shoulder. "It's okay, Mommy," she murmured, the words slightly muffled. "The big lonely thing won't make the ground shake anymore. Not now that it has me to talk to. Sarah's gaze met Jorge's over their daughter's head. In that look, 30 years of his silence unraveled. He gave a single, small, helpless nod. The secret was no longer his alone. It was theirs now. A third, unseen member of their family. Life did not return to normal, because normal had been redefined. Eliza no longer sleepwalked. The frantic drawings stopped. She was still their daughter, still a little girl who loved strawberry ice cream and cartoon ponies. But there was a new depth to her, a quiet reserve. Sometimes, Jorge would catch her staring out the window with an expression of profound listening, a faint, distant smile on her lips. She was tuning a station the rest of them could not hear. He took her back to the pine circle a week later. The air was just air. The ground was just ground. But Eliza walked to the center and sat down, placing her palms flat on the soil. She closed her eyes for a long minute, then opened them. "It's happy," she reported. "It showed me a picture of a river changing its course. It took 1,000 years. It was beautiful." Jorge felt a complex, aching emotion, loss, fear, and a strange, reluctant pride. His daughter was navigating a geography of time and stone that would have driven him mad. She was the translator, the interpreter, the bridge. He began to join her on these visits, not as a protector but as a student. He brought his old journals, and she would point to his frantic, childish sketches and correct them with a quiet authority. "That's not a tunnel. It's a thought," she would say. Or that hum is its heartbeat. It's very slow. One evening, as they walked home through the twilight, she slipped her hand into his. "It asked about you," she said. A cold trickle of fear ran down his spine. "What did it ask?" "It wanted to know why you were so scared. I told it you were scared for me. It understands that. It says it has children too. The mountains are its children. The deep water is its children. The deep water is its child. It says they are all sleeping and it is the only one awake." The concept was so colossal it left him breathless. The presence was not the land itself, but a caretaker of the land, a lonely shepherd of sleeping titans. The following spring, the town council announced plans for a new housing development on the old Hadley property and the surrounding fields. The paperwork was fast-tracked. The bulldozers were scheduled. Progress had finally come to Stillwater. That night, Eliza came to him, her face troubled. "It's worried," she said. "The machines will cut the long routes. It will hurt the things that are sleeping." Jorge knew what he had to do. He went to see Ben Miller the next day. He didn't go to the sheriff's office. He went to his house after dinner. He laid it all out, not as a frightened man, but as a representative. He spoke of the sleeping children of the earth, of the roots that were not rock but nerves, of the lonely guardian whose attention was now a conscious, directed thing. Ben listened, his face growing graver with each word. When Jorge finished, he sighed, a long, weary exhalation. "Jorge, the permits are approved. The money's on the table. I can't stop this with a story about a lonely ghost in the ground." "You don't have to stop it," Jorge said. "Just delay it. For 1 week. Let me try something else." Ben studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. 1 week, but that's all I can give you." Jorge spent that week with Eliza and his old journals, cross-referencing her insights with his old, fragmented data. They weren't just making a map. They were drawing a schematic of a living system. On the final day of the reprieve, Jorge requested to speak at the town council meeting. He stood before the mayor and the council members, a hardware store owner with a sheaf of papers in his hand. He did not speak of monsters or voices. He spoke of unstable substrate, of undocumented karst formations, of a high probability of catastrophic, repeated sinkholes. He presented his findings as a concerned citizen and a local businessman, using the dry, technical language of geology and engineering. He cited the Hadley incident, the settling of the schoolhouse, the strange dips and wells noted in old surveys. He had created a perfectly rational, scientifically veiled argument for why building on that land was a financial and legal disaster waiting to happen. The council was skeptical, but Ben Miller, from the back of the room, spoke up. "I've seen some of the old reports he's talking about. My dad mentioned it was always unstable out there. Maybe we should order a new, independent survey. It would be cheaper than a lawsuit later." The delay was granted. The new survey, much to the genuine surprise of the outside engineers, found a bewildering and unstable network of fissures and voids exactly where Jorge's maps had indicated. The development was tabled indefinitely. That night, Jorge stood on his porch. The hum was gone, not just for him, but for Eliza too. She came out and stood beside him. "It says thank you," she said softly. "It's going to sleep for a little while now. It's tired." He put his arm around her, pulling her close. He looked out at the dark, quiet line of the earth, no longer a threat, but a responsibility. The secret was no longer a curse to be borne, but a pact to be honored. The quiet life was indeed over, replaced by something deeper and more fragile. He was the guardian of the guardian, the father of the bridge. And for the first time in 30 years, standing in the deep, resonant silence, Jorge was not afraid.